Dove Books on Tape presents Poodle Springs, a novel by Raymond Chandler and Robert B. Parker. Linda stopped the Fleetwood convertible in front of the house. She leaned back and looked at me. I rented the house for the season. It's a bit on the shishi side, but so is Poodle Springs. There are only 2 bedrooms, but the master has a Hollywood bed as big as a tennis court. If we don't get on together, we can be distant. Darling, you can be a bastard. I'm paying $1,200 a month for this dive. I want you to like it. I love it. $1,200 a month is more than I make being a detective. It'll be the first time I've been kept. Damn you, Marlowe, it's not my fault that I'm rich, and if I have the money, I'm going to spend it, and if you're around, some of it is bound to rub off on you. You'll just have to put up with that. Yes, darling. I kissed her. I'll get a pet monkey, and after a while you won't be able to tell us apart. You can't have a monkey in Poodle Springs. You have to have a poodle. She backed the Fleetwood into the driveway. Augustino will put the car away. Oh, yeah, the butler, cook, and comforter of sad hearts. Nice kid, I like him, I said, and went around the car to help her out. She fell into my arms. She smelled divine. I kissed her again. A man turning off a sprinkler in front of the next house grinned and waved. I went on kissing her. We'd been married just 3 weeks and 4 days. It was a very handsome house, except that it stank decorator. It contained plenty of furniture, also the finest inlaid desk I had ever seen. The hi-fi system had speakers in every room. Augustino had turned it on softly. He appeared in the door, smiling and bowing. He was a nice-looking lad, part Hawaiian and part Japanese. Linda had picked him up when we made a short trip to Maui. It's wonderful what you can pick up if you have $10 million. There was an interior patio with some tropical shrubs and a number of rough stones picked up on the high desert for nothing, but $250 apiece to the customer. The bathroom had a door to the pool and to the interior patio and the outside patio. The Hammond organ had been built out into a bar. That nearly threw me. In the living room were couches matching the carpet and a Chinese chest that looked very genuine. One wall was entirely of glass. The bathroom had a sunken bath and closets big enough to hold all the clothes 12 debutantes could want to buy, and $400 or $500 worth of cosmetics and perfumes and God knows what on the shelves. It's too rich for me, I said. I'm going to have to dust my office after this. You're not going to have any office. What do you suppose I married you for? Come into the bedroom. Let's have a fight about the closets, who gets which. Then we could wrestle a bit. And then? We could have a shower and a swim and an early lunch. You have an early lunch. I'll go downtown and look for an office. There's a lot of money here, and I might grab off an occasional nickel. I don't know why I married you, but you were so insistent. I grabbed her and held her close. I passed on to her nose and cheeks and then her mouth. At first it was just a mouth, then it was a darting tongue, then it was a long sigh, and 2 people as close as 2 people can get. I'll never change you, will I? Do you really want to make a purring pussycat out of me? No. I didn't marry you because I had a lot of money. I married you because I love you. I don't want to make you cheap, darling. I just want to try to make you happy. I want to make you happy. But I'm not holding enough cards. I'm a poor man married to a rich wife. I don't know how to behave. I'm only sure of one thing, shabby office or not. That's where I became what I am. May I borrow the Fleetwood for a little while? Tomorrow I'll fly to L.A. and pick up my olds. Darling, does it have to be this way? It seems so unnecessary. For me, there isn't any other way. The Fleetwood purred me down to the office of a man named Thorson, who didn't seem to have a care in the world except to keep his pipe lit. Offices are hard to find, Mr. Marlowe. If you want one on Canyon Drive, as I assume you do, it'll cost you. I don't want one on Canyon Drive. I want one on some side street or on Sioux Avenue. I couldn't afford one on the main stem. I gave him my card and let him look at the photostat of my license. My wife just rented a place out near Romanoff's. He didn't fall out of his chair, but he damn well had to steady himself. You mean Harlan Potter's daughter? I heard she'd married some... Well, the hell with it. What do I mean? You're the man, I take it. I'm sure we can fix you up, Mr. Marlowe, but why do you want it on a side street? Why not in the best section? I'm paying with my own money. I don't have a hell of a lot. But your wife. Listen good, Thorson. The most I make is a couple of $1,000 a month, gross. Some months, nothing at all. I can't afford a showy layout. Would your wife like that? What my wife likes or dislikes doesn't enter into our business, Thorson. Have you got anything or haven't you? Well, I look elsewhere. I goofed my way out of the open door. If anybody ever closes a door in Poodle Springs, it's a nervous reaction. On the way out, I bumped into a big, florid man who had 4 inches and 30 pounds on me. "I'm Manny Lipschultz," he said. "You're Philip Marlowe. Let's talk." "I got here about 2 hours ago," I said. "I'm looking for an office. Would you please let me by?" "Things get known in this burg. Harlan Potter's son-in-law, huh? That rings a lot of bells. I'm in trouble. I need a good man. When I get an office, come and see me. Right now, I have deep affairs on my mind." "I may not be alive that long," he said quietly. "Ever hear of the Agony Club? I own it." I looked back into the office of Senor Thorson. He had his ears out a foot. "Not here," I said. "Call me after I talk to the law." I gave him the number. He gave me a tired smile and moved out of the way. I went back to the Fleetwood and tooled it gracefully to the cop house. I parked in an official slot and went in. A very pretty blonde in a policewoman's uniform was at the desk. "You're Philip Marlowe, aren't you? I've seen your photo in the L.A. papers. What can we do for you, Mr. Marlowe?" "I'm checking in. Do I talk to you or to the duty sergeant? And which street could I walk down without being called by name?" She smiled. "You'd better talk to Sergeant Whitestone." She nodded me towards a closed door. I knocked and opened it, and I was looking at a calm-looking man with the sort of eyes that have seen too much nastiness and heard too many liars. "My name's Marlowe. I'm a private eye. I'm going to open an office here if I can find one, and if you let me." I opened my wallet and let him look at my license. He scowled. Then he snapped his fingers. "Don't tell me. Let me guess. Hell. It's bad enough to have a private eye mousing around, but a private eye who's backed by a couple of $100 million, that's inhuman." "I'm not backed by any 200 million, Sergeant. I'm on my own, and I'm a relatively poor man." "Yeah, you and me both, but I forgot to marry the boss's daughter. Us cops are stupid." I sat down and lit a cigarette. "It's no use, is it?" I said. "I can't convince you that I'm just another guy trying to scratch a living. Do you know somebody named Lipschultz who owns a club?" "Too well. His place is out in the desert outside of jurisdiction. Every so often the Riverside DA has him raided. They say he permits gambling at his joint. I wouldn't know. He braced me in front of the office of a real estate man named Thorson, said he was in trouble." The sergeant stared at me expressionlessly. "Stay away from him. Some of that trouble might rub off on you." I stood up. "Thanks, Sergeant. I just wanted to check with you." "You checked in. I'm looking forward to the day you check out." I went out and closed the door. The pretty policewoman gave me a nice smile. "I guess no cop ever liked a private eye," I said. "You look all right to me, Mr. Marlowe." I grinned at her fascinatingly and went out of the cop house and climbed into our lonely Fleetwood. I struck out for the mansion. A couple of tourist cars passed me going to see the palms in the state park, as if they couldn't see all the palms they needed in Poodle Springs itself. A big Buick Roadmaster was behind me, taking it easy. At a stretch of road that seemed empty, it suddenly put on speed, flashed past, and turned in ahead of me. 2 men jumped out of the car, both were very sports-clothy, and trotted back to where I had braked to a stop. A couple of guns flashed into their busy hands. I reached for the glove compartment, but there wasn't time. They were beside the Fleetwood. "Lippy wants to talk to you," a nasal voice snarled. He looked like any cheap punk. The other one was taller, thinner, but no more delicious. But they held the guns in a casually competent manner. "Put the heaters away. I don't have one." "After he spoke to you, you went to the cops. Lippy don't like that." "Let me guess," I said brightly. "Lippy would be Mr. Lipschultz? Why does he want to see me so badly that he has to send a couple of schnooks after me?" "On business. Big stuff." One of the boys moved around behind the Fleetwood and reached for the right-hand door. It had to be now if it was going to be at all. I pushed down on the accelerator. A cheap car would have stalled, but not the Fleetwood. It shot forward and sent the taller hood reeling. It smashed hard into the rear end of the Roadmaster. I couldn't see what it did to the Fleetwood. There might be a small scratch on the front bumper. In the middle of the crash, I yanked the glove compartment open and grabbed the .38 I'd carried in Mexico. Not that I had ever needed it. But when you're with Linda, you don't take chances. The smaller hood had started running. The other was still on his sitter. I hopped out of the Fleetwood and fired a shot over his head. The other hood stopped dead 6 feet away. "Look, darlings," I said, "if Lippy wants to talk to me, he can't do it with me full of lead. And never show a gun unless you're prepared to use it. I am. You're not." The tall boy climbed to his feet and put his gun away sullenly. The other did the same. They went to look at their car. I backed the Fleetwood level with the Roadmaster. "I'll go see Lippy," I said. "He needs some advice about his staff. So long, putrid. See you in the boneyard." I gave the Fleetwood the gun and was out of sight. I turned into our street and pulled up in front of the house and looked at the front of the Fleetwood. It was bent a little, not much, but too much for a lady like Linda to drive it. I went into the house and found her in the bedroom staring at dresses. "You've been loafing," I said. "You haven't rearranged the furniture yet." "Darling," she threw herself at me like a medium-fast pitch, high and inside. "What have you been doing?" "I bumped your car into the back of another one. You'd better telephone for a few more Fleetwoods." "What on earth happened? You're not a sloppy driver." "I did it on purpose. A man named Lipschultz braced me as I came out of a realtor's office. He wanted to talk business, but I didn't have the time then, so he had a couple of morons with guns try to persuade me. I bashed them." "Of course you did, darling. Quite right, too." "What is a realtor?" "A real estate man with a carnation." "You didn't ask me how badly damaged your car is." "Stop calling it my car. It's our car, and I don't suppose it's damaged enough to notice. Anyhow, we need a sedan for evenings. Have you had lunch?" "You take it awfully goddamned calmly that I might have been shot." "Well, I was really thinking about something else. I'm afraid Father'll start buying up the town. You know how he is about publicity." "How right he is. I've been called by my name by a half-dozen people already, including an exquisitely pretty policewoman." "Ask Tino to give you some lunch. Any more of this conversation, and I'll forget I'm arranging my dresses." I found an office finally, as close to a dump as Poodle Springs gets, south of Ramon Drive, upstairs over a filling station. There was an outside stairway that led to one room with a sink in the corner and a cheap deal desk left over from the previous tenant, a guy who maybe sold insurance, and maybe other stuff. Whatever he sold, he didn't make enough to pay the rent, and the geezer who owned the building had booted him out. Besides the desk, there was a squeaky swivel chair and a gray metal file cabinet, and a calendar that had a picture on it of a dog tugging down a little girl's bathing suit bottom. "Darling, this is appalling," Linda said when she saw it. "I could just have someone come in." "This is what I can afford," I said. Linda nodded. "Well, I'm sure it'll do very nicely," she said. "Now let's go out to lunch." The phone rang. Linda picked it up. "Philip Marlowe's office," she said. Then she listened and wrinkled her nose and handed the phone to me. "It must be a client, darling. He sounds appalling." I said yeah into the mouthpiece, and a voice I'd heard before said, "Marlowe, this is Manny Lipschultz." "Okay. Sending a couple of hard boys after you was a mistake. I've made bigger." I let that slide. "If you're open for business, I'd like to talk to you." "Go ahead," I said. "Can you come here?" "The Agony Club?" "Yeah, you know where it is?" "Just out of Poodle Springs jurisdiction," I said. "When?" "Now." "I'll be out in half an hour," I said, and hung up. Linda was looking at me with her arms folded across her chest. I put my hands behind my head and smiled at her. She had on little sling-strap high-heeled white shoes, the right toe of which was tapping on the floor. "I'll be out in half an hour," she said. "First client," I said. "I have to earn a living." "And our lunch?" I stood. "I'll drop you off at home." She nodded and turned and went out of the office ahead of me. When I dropped her off, she didn't kiss me goodbye, even though I went around and opened the door for her. A charmer, Marlowe, a model of courtliness. The Agony Club was northeast of Poodle Springs, just over the line in Riverside County. It looked like a bordello for wealthy Mexicans, all white stucco and red tile, with fountains in the courtyard and bougainvillea creeping along its flanks. It had a slightly tarnished look like an overaged screen star. There were no cars in the big crushed stone circular driveway. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner somewhere out of sight like a locust behind the building. I parked the Olds under the portcullis at the back of the courtyard and walked through the entry. There were two big carved mahogany doors, one slightly ajar. I pushed through it into the suddenly cool indoors. It felt good after the hard desert heat, but it felt artificial, too, like the soothing touch of an embalmer. The two hoods who'd braced me the other day appeared from somewhere to the right. The taller one said, "You carrying?" "Yeah," I said. "You never know when there might be something to shoot out here." The smaller hood was only half visible in the gloomy doorway. I could see the light glint of the gun in his hand. "Can't see Lippy with a gun," the tall one said. I shrugged and opened my coat, and the tall one took the gun smoothly from under my arm. He looked at it. 2-inch barrel, he said. Not much good at a distance. I only work close up, I said. The tall one led the way across the open central space. There were tables set up for blackjack. There were roulette wheels and tables for dice. Along the far left wall was a polished mahogany bar with bottles arranged artfully in front of a mirrored wall behind it. The little hood walked behind me. I didn't think he had his gun out anymore, but I didn't want him to catch me looking. At the far end of the bar, 3 steps led up to a big office that belonged to Manny Lipschultz. He was sitting behind a desk the size of a shuffleboard court. "Marlowe," he said, "sit down. You want a drink?" He got up, went around a rosewood sideboard, took a decanter from it, and filled 2 thick, chunky glasses half full. He handed me one and went around behind his desk. "It's okay, Leonard," he said to the tall hood. "Beat it." Leonard and his little buddy disappeared silently into the dimness. I sipped my drink. Scotch. Better than I was used to, even if my wife did have $10 million. "Glad you could make it, Marlowe," Lipschultz said. "Me too," I said. "Gotta make a living." "Married to Harlan Potter's daughter?" "That means she doesn't have to make a living," I said. Lipschultz nodded. "I got a problem, Marlowe." I waited. "What we do here ain't, quite legal. Ever wonder why we don't get the arm laid on us?" "No," I said, "but if I did, I'd figure you had backing, and the backing had the kind of money which keeps people from getting the arm laid on them." Lipschultz smiled. "I knew you was smart even before I had you checked out." "So with that kind of connection, what do you need me for?" Lipschultz shook his head sadly. He had a thick nose to go with his red face, and slick black hair combed tight on each side of his bullet head. "Can't use that backing in this," he said. "Fact, if you don't help me out, the backing's going to maybe send some people out to see me, you follow? If they do, you should get better help than the 2 yahoos you got now." "That's the truth," Lippy said. "Hard to get people out here. I mean, this ain't Los Angeles. Not everybody likes the desert. Why, I was so glad when I found out you was here. I heard about you when you was operating out of Hollywood." "Your lucky day," I said. "What do you want me to do?" He handed me an IOU for $100,000, with the signature Les Valentine across the bottom in a neat, very small hand. "Me," Lippy said, "taking a guy's marker for 100 G's. I must be getting old." "How come you did?" I said. "He had money in the family, always made good before. And when Mr. Big that runs you audited the books one day, he noticed you were 100,000 short." "His bookkeeper," Lipschultz said. "And Mr. Blackstone came to see me." The air-conditioned room was full of cold, but Lipschultz was sweating. He pulled the silk show handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his neck with it. "Drove right out here himself and sat where you're sitting and told me I had 30 days to cover the loss," Lipschultz said. "Or? There ain't no or with Mr. Blackstone, Marlowe." "So you want me to find the guy who stuck you?" Lipschultz nodded. "I find people, Lipschultz. I don't shake them down. That's all I'm asking you, Marlowe. I'm at 100 grand. I don't get it back, I'm dead." "What if he doesn't have it? Guys that lose 100 G's at the tables don't usually have it for long," I said. "He's got it. His wife's worth 30 million. "So why not ask her?" "I have. She don't believe me. She says her Lester wouldn't do that. And I say, ask Lester, and she says he's away now doing stills for some movie shooting north of L.A. "How come you didn't shake her down?" Lipschultz shook his head. "She's a lady," he said. "And you're a gentleman?" Lipschultz shrugged. "What the hell," he said. "I believed that like I believed you should draw to an inside straight." "I'll pay you 10% if you get the money," Lipschultz said. "I get $100 a day and expenses," I said. Lipschultz nodded. "Heard you was a Boy Scout." "There's some people doing 20 to life in San Quentin thought the same thing," I said. Lipschultz grinned. "Heard you thought you was tough, too." "Where do I find this guy?" I said. "Les Valentine lives with his wife somewhere out near the Racket Club. Want me to look it up?" "I'm a trained sleuth. I'll look it up. Can I keep the IOU?" "Sure," Lipschultz said. "I got copies." Lipschultz gave me $100 as a retainer and pushed a button somewhere because Leonard and his alter ego showed up. Leonard gave me back my gun and watched while I got into the Olds and drove away with a hot wind washing over me through the open windows. Les Valentine's house was off Racket Club Road on one of those little streets created to make an instant neighborhood. No one was in sight. The only movement was the soft sluice of water sprinklers. Everybody was probably inside trying on outfits for the Racket Club Saturday night. I parked the Olds and walked up the white stone path to the porch. A Japanese houseboy opened the door and put me in the front parlor while he went for Madame. The room was all white stucco. In one corner was a fireplace in case the temperature dropped below 90 after the sun went down. On the front wall was a large oil painting of a mean-looking guy in a three-piece suit, with big white eyebrows and the mouth of a man who tips people a nickel. To the left of the fireplace were a series of photographs, full of arty lighting and over-the-shoulder poses of women. Black and white stuff framed expensively as if they were important. On an easel was a big blow-up of a man and a woman. She was in her mid-30s, serious-looking, with the same kind of mouth as the mean-looking old guy in the oil on the front wall. Even though he was balding, the man with her seemed younger. He wore rimless glasses and a smile that said, "Don't pay attention to me." "Mr. Marlowe?" I turned to look at the woman from the picture. She was frowning down at the brand-new card I'd had printed up. I hadn't even had an office yet when I ordered them, so they merely said, "Philip Marlowe Investigation, Poodle Springs." Linda had vetoed the brass knuckles rampant. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Have you been admiring my husband's work?" "Yes, ma'am." "Is that your husband with you here?" I nodded at the picture. "Yes, that's Les. He set the timer and then joined me. He's very clever. That's my father in the painting," she said. I smiled. "I'm trying to locate your husband, Mrs. Valentine." "Really?" "Yes. I've been employed to find him by a man who claims that your husband ran up $100,000 in gambling debts at his, casino and left him holding IOUs for the amount." "IOUs for illegal gambling are not enforceable," she snapped. "Could you tell me where your husband is now, ma'am? Perhaps if I talked with him I could clear this up." "Les is on location in San Benedict with a film company. He's doing publicity photographs. He's a very accomplished and well-regarded photographer." "Which studio is he working for?" Mrs. Valentine shrugged. "I don't keep track." When she wasn't speaking, she kept her lips slightly apart and her tongue moved restlessly in her mouth. "And I am certainly not going to have him beset with some wild accusations from a man known to be a criminal." I didn't say who my employer was. "I know who it is. It's that Mr. Lipschultz. He approached me directly, and I let him know then what I thought of his cock-and-bull story." I took Lippy's IOU out of my inside pocket and held it up for her to see. She shook her head angrily. "He showed me that, too. I don't believe it. It's not Les's signature." I got up and walked to one of the artsy framed photographs on the wall. In the lower right corner they were signed Les Valentine in the same innocuous, cramped little hand that I had on the IOU. I held the IOU signature beside the photo signature. I held the pose for a minute with my eyebrows raised. She stared at the two signatures, as if she'd never seen either. Then she turned to me. "My husband enjoys gambling, Mr. Marlowe. I've been happy to indulge him in this. My father would have said weakness, I suppose. I enjoy my father's affection and his largesse. Les is an artistic man, and like many artists, he is full of quirky needs, sensitivities that other men perhaps like you do not necessarily have. In the past, I've paid his debts and been happy to have contributed in my way to his artistic fulfillment." She went back to the sideboard and poured herself a drink. It looked like something she did easily. "But this $100,000 to a man like Lipschultz—" She shook her head as if she couldn't continue. "We talked. I said that it was time for him to become responsible. I hoped, frankly, to snap him out of his childishness in this regard. I said he would have to liquidate this debt himself." I looked at the photographs of young women on the wall. I wondered how many sensitivities Les had to be indulged in. "Does he work out of his home?" I said. She shifted her hips restlessly. There was a smudge of red along the high cheekbones on the schoolmarm face. "Like a part-time plumber? Hardly. He has an office in Los Angeles." "Do you have the address, Mrs. Valentine?" "Certainly not. Our marriage is perfectly founded on trust. I don't need to know his office address." I let my eyes run over the glamour photos mounted on the wall. All were signed in the lower right corner in gold in the distinctive small hand. Mrs. Valentine was watching me. She put her drink on the sideboard and ran her hands along her body, smoothing the fabric on her thighs. "The $100,000 is a matter between you and Les and that dreadful Mr. Lipschultz. If you want to play your little boy games, go ahead. I will await the outcome." She sipped her drink. "Goodbye, Mr. Marlowe." I stood, put on my hat, and went out of there. I pulled the Olds in beside Linda's Fleetwood and went through the make-believe living room and out onto the patio by the pool. Linda was on a pale blue chaise, wearing a one-piece white bathing suit and a pale blue wide-brimmed hat that matched the chaise. On the low white table next to the chaise, a tall, narrow glass contained something with fruit in it. Linda looked up from her book. "Darling, have you had a hard day?" I sat in the pale blue chair beside the chaise. Linda ran one fingernail along the crease of my pants. "Did my big detective get all worked out working all day?" Tino appeared at the patio door. "May I bring you something, sir?" I smiled gratefully. "A gimlet," I said. "Make it a double." Tino nodded and disappeared. "I talked to Lipschultz," I said. "I also talked to Mrs. Les Valentine." Linda raised her eyebrows. "Muffy Blackstone?" "Woman, maybe 45, I said. Looks like someone pasted the head of a schoolteacher on the body of a Varga girl." "That's Muffy, though I'm not sure I like you noticing the body." "Just doing my job," I said. "She's Clayton Blackstone's daughter. He's a friend of Daddy's, very wealthy. At 40 she married for the first time a nobody." The Springs was in an uproar. "What do you know about Les?" "Very little. No money, no distinction. It's assumed he married her for her money." "He seems quite a drab little man," Linda said. "Yeah. Probably has a run-down office someplace over a garage." "Oh, darling," Linda said, "don't be such a bastard." Tino appeared with a large square glass set on a squat stem. He carefully set it down on a napkin by my elbow. He looked at Linda's glass, noticed it was nearly full, and went silently away. "What does Clayton Blackstone do?" I said. "He's wealthy," she said. "That's what he does." "Like your daddy." Linda smiled brightly. I sipped some of the gimlet. It was clean and cold and slid down through the desert parch like a fresh rain. "Hard to make all that money," I said, "without getting your hands a little dirty." "Daddy never said that." "No, I'll bet he didn't." "Why do you say that?" "What are you doing talking to Muffy Blackstone?" "Valentine. Muffy Valentine." I drank another swallow of the gimlet. The pool glistened blue and still beside me. "Her husband is into Lippy for 100 G's. "Into?" Lippy took his marker. Mrs. Valentine had always bailed him out before. This time she won't. Says he's got to grow up and settle this debt himself. "Well, good for her. I'm sure he's been a dreadful trial." "She seems a little trying herself," I said. "Yes, I suppose she is," Linda said. A beautiful frown wrinkle appeared briefly between her eyebrows. I leaned over and kissed it. "She was single all that time and devoted to Daddy and all. She drinks a little too much, too." "Lippy hired me to find Les and talk him into giving Lippy his 100,000. "Well, if anyone can do it, I'm sure you can. Look how you've been able to talk me right out of my clothes," Linda said. "As I recall, I don't get the chance to." We each drank a little bit of our drink. "Funny thing," I said after a while. The big boss guy was going to put the heat on Lippy. His name was Blackstone. Clayton Blackstone? I don't know. Probably a different Blackstone. Oh, I'm sure, Linda said. High up a prairie hawk moved in slow circles, riding the wind's currents, its spread wings nearly motionless. Why would you do this, darling? Work for Lipschultz. In my business, you don't get all well-bred upper-class people who have good manners, I said. In my kind of work, Lipschultz is well above average. Then why not get into another business, Linda said. I like my work. I'm sure Daddy would. I cut her off. Sure he could. And I could get a gray flannel suit and be the boss's son-in-law, except I'm kind of old to be the boss's son-in-law. Linda looked away. Look, Mrs. Marlowe, I find work that fits what I do and who I am. Manny Lipschultz is not hiring me to do something illegal or even immoral. He's in trouble and he needs help, and he's got money and I need some. Would you be happier if I took Mrs. Valentine's money to help her husband welch on his debt? I'd rather we stopped talking about this, and went in and had dinner, and then retired to our room, and— She shrugged her shoulders in a way that didn't mean I don't know. You're very demanding, Mrs. Marlowe. Yes, she said, I am. We went in and left the glasses where they were. What the hell? Tina would pick them up. Didn't want the help getting bored. There were 55 Valentines in the L.A. phone book. One was a Lester and one was a Leslie. Lester was a division manager for Pacific Bell. Leslie was a retail florist. I called information. They had no other Les Valentines listed. I had no office in L.A. anymore. I had to make the calls from a phone booth on the corner of Cahuenga and Hollywood across from the old office. I also called a local modeling agency and the Chamber of Commerce in San Benedict. They were both civil to me, which is a high average in L.A. It was January and cool. Across the valley, the highest peaks of the San Gabriel Mountains were snow-capped. I was back in town for the first time in a month, fast, tough, and on a case. I got in the Olds, went south a block to Sunset, and then headed west. The Triton Modeling Agency was in a courtyard off of Westwood Avenue just north of Olympic. Behind the desk, a blonde with long thighs was applying scarlet color to her lips. She closed her compact mirror and looked at me. Yes, cowboy? My name's Marlowe. I called about one of your models, Sandra Lee. Ah, the detective. She looked me over the way a fish examines a worm. Well, you've certainly got the shoulders for it, she said. I called her. She said you can come see her at her place. The blonde handed me a piece of paper with an address on it. It's off Beverly Glen, near the top. I gave her the gunman's salute with my thumb and forefinger and left. I picked up Beverly Glen off of Wilshire. North of Sunset it started to climb. Sandra Lee's house was full of flowering shrubs, and hummingbirds danced and spiraled over them as I pulled the car to a stop near the front door. A Mexican woman answered my ring. Miss Lee was in the solarium. I followed her through the overdone bungalow into a glass addition that leaned against the front side of the house. Miss Lee was reclining indoors on a leather-covered fainting couch, wearing a very small two-piece black bathing suit and tanning in the rays of the afternoon sun as it came filtering through the glass roof. The woman on the couch had been on so many magazine covers that I felt I knew her. Her hair was jet black, and her eyes were black, and her skin was pale even after tanning. She looked like you could disappear forever into one of her sighs. Miss Lee, I'm Philip Marlowe. I've been expecting you. Will you have a drink? I said I would. She smiled slowly and nodded toward the bar. Please help yourself. I really need to get another 15 minutes of sun, she said. She spoke very slowly, and you were obliged to hang on her words. I made a tall scotch at the bar and sat where she could see me. I tried not to stare at her. I saw your photograph yesterday hanging in the hallway of a man's home, I said. He's a photographer, and you had posed for him. Oh? What's his name? She said. Les Valentine. She took a long pull on a glass half full of what looked like water, but probably wasn't. She shook her head slowly. I don't know any less. I only let a few people photograph me. I'd know if anyone took my picture. She shifted slightly with the sun, her nearly still body absorbing all it could get, like some kind of gorgeous lizard. So why would a guy named Les Valentine have a picture of you to which he'd signed his name? Because he wishes people to think he's photographed me, but he has not. It makes people think he's important. But he is not. If he were important, I would know him. And he you, I said. She smiled at me as if we knew the secret to eternal health. Do you think I'm beautiful? I nodded. She drank a little more of her drink and put the glass down and smiled at me. I think you're beautiful, too. But you've not seen everything. She put her hands behind her back and unhitched her bra strap. Then she rolled over and slid out of the bikini bottoms. Then she lay back and smiled at me, her pale tan body naked as a salamander. Have I told you about Mrs. Marlowe? I said. You are married? She shrugged. I'm married. She beckoned again with her arms. I took a cigarette out and put it in my mouth and let it hang there unlit. Look, Mrs. Lee, I started. Mrs. Ricardo, she said. Lee is my maiden name, so you may call me Miss Lee, or Mrs. Ricardo, you see, but you can't call me Mrs. Lee. Fine. You are very attractive, and I am very male, and seeing you there rolling around in the nude has the usual effect. But being as I'm married and all, I only sleep with my wife. I took the unlit cigarette out of my mouth and rolled it between my fingers. We both looked at it. Which I do often, I said. I put the cigarette back in my mouth and lit it. When I looked up, I saw a tall man with a very strong nose standing in the doorway. I exhaled smoke slowly. What the hell, the tall guy said. He had black hair and hard dark eyes that glimmered on either side of the hatchet nose. Tommy, Sandra Lee said. Mr. Marlowe was admiring how beautiful I am. I can see that, Tommy said. Mr. Marlowe, this is my husband, Tommy Ricardo. For Christ's sake, sonny, cover yourself, Ricardo said. Then his glance came back to me. She do this often, I said. He took 2 steps toward me, and his right hand came out of the pocket of his plaid Madras sport coat. He had brass knuckles on it. I was on my feet just in time to pull my chin out of the way of the knucks. I slipped under his left arm and got a full Nelson on him. You son of a bitch, he gasped. Taking them off wasn't my idea. She looks good, but I've got a wife who looks better, and when you showed up I was telling her that. Lee was giggling. I looked over. She was still buck naked. Mrs. Ricardo, do you know anything at all about a guy named Les Valentine? I said. She shook her head slowly. Her eyes were wide, and the pupils were very dilated. Maybe there was more than vodka in the decanter. Okay. I bent Ricardo farther forward, let go the Nelson, and shoved with my knee. He went forward, stumbling 3 or 4 steps, and by the time he was able to get his balance, I was out the door and in my olds and heading downhill, with the sound of her giggle still ringing in my ear. It was 5 o'clock. The lights in the houses began to flick on, making sort of a Christmas tree effect in the dark hills. Sandra Lee's home probably looked just as pretty as the others now in the early evening, with the darkness gathering. They knew something out here. You could make anything look good with the right lighting. The 3-hour drive back to Poodle Springs was more than I could face, so I had a steak in a joint on La Cienega and bedded down in a roach trap on Hollywood Boulevard. There was no room service, but the clerk said he could sell me a half-pint of bonded rye for $1. I sipped a little of the rye while I talked on the phone to Linda. Then I fell asleep and dreamed of a cave, and from the darkness came a giggle endlessly repeating. In the morning I showered and shaved, ate eggs and toast at Schwab's counter, and drank 3 cups of coffee. I loaded my pipe, got it fired, climbed into the Olds, and drove through Laurel Canyon. I picked up 101 in Ventura and headed west through the Santa Monica Mountains and then north along the coast. San Benedict looks like tourists think California looks. It's full of white stuccoed houses and red tile roofs. The Pacific rolls in flatly along its ocean front where palm trees grow sedately in a long, orderly park. I parked behind a truck full of electrical gear and walked into the location. Every time I went to where they were shooting a film, I was struck by how easy the access is. I stopped a boy at the commissary truck. "Who's in charge around here?" I said. "Hell of a question," he said. "You from the studio?" "No, I'm just looking for a guy. Who do I talk to about staff?" "Line producer's Joe King. He's down by the cameras." The fat guy had a paper cup of coffee in each hand and gestured with his belly in the direction of the cameras. "Where you see all the lights," he said. I walked where he told me to, picking my way over the tangle of cables and around light stands and generators. There were several men grouped behind the cameras while the director of photography fiddled with the lighting. "Which one of you is Joe King?" A tall young guy turned toward me. There seemed to be a great natural calmness in him. "I'm Joe. Name's Marlowe, looking for a photographer named Les Valentine." King looked up at me, friendly as an alderman at a picnic. Can't say I know him. I was led to believe he was here shooting the stills. King shook his head. "No, we have a studio photographer that does that for us. Name's Gus Johnson. I don't know any Les Val whatever." "If he were here, would you know it?" "Certainly." "Thank you." King shrugged and turned back to the camera, and I headed back to my car. There were several things I thought as I drove back down the coast. The most important one was that Les Valentine was not who his wife said he was, or who he said he was. He didn't have an office in L.A. He hadn't photographed Sandra Lee. He wasn't shooting stills on a movie being shot in San Benedict. After 2 days hot on his trail, I knew less than I had when I started. I'd been watching Muffy Valentine's house for a week. Every morning she came out wearing a light raincoat over lavender tights and headed off to her exercise class. 2 minutes later, the Japanese houseboy came out with 2 toy poodles straining on the leash and walked off around the bend. Each day he returned with them about 5 minutes after his employer returned from exercising. After 3 days of this, I followed him and watched him go in the front door of another house, poodles and all. He stayed in there for 45 minutes, and when he came out, I got a quick glimpse of a Japanese housemaid closing the door behind him. About 20 minutes later, a woman with platinum hair and pink tights pulled up in a silver Mercedes and strolled into the house. Even from a distance, I could see the light glinting on her diamonds. I thought carefully on these matters, and the following Monday, while Muffy and her neighbor were at exercise class and the houseboy was playing Japanese sandman with his countrywoman, I set out to break into and enter Muffy's house. I had a clipboard with a yellow pad on it and a pencil behind my ear. That normally is enough to get you into the president's bedroom unquestioned, but to make doubly sure, I carried a tape measure on my belt. A tape measure combined with a clipboard will get you in while the president and the first lady are locked in carnal embrace. I walked up the front walk and measured the front door while I checked what kind of lock there was. It was a bulger. I took out a collection of master keys I'd collected over the years and, on the second try, opened the front door. I went down the long hallway and found their bedroom, a huge pink canopied bed. A long dressing table stood along the wall. The top drawer contained women's lingerie. In the second drawer were blouses. In the bottom drawer were some men's shirts, socks, and underwear. There was also a checkbook and a small bottle of eye drops. I pocketed the checkbook. I looked at my watch. Time was up. I went down the stairs, closed the front door, strolled down the walk, got into my Olds, and was driving away well within the speed limit when I passed Muffy, barely peeping over the dashboard of her enormous black Chrysler. She paid me no attention, having all she could do to pilot the Chrysler. My office over the gas station wasn't air-conditioned. It was like walking into a pizza oven, but it didn't smell as good. I left the door open and turned on the oscillating fan I'd brought from L.A. when I closed my office in the Coenga building. The hot air moved the sweat around on my face as I sat at my desk and looked at the checkbook. Not much for committing a felony punishable by 1 to 5 in Soledad. The checkbook was not joint, just Lester A. Valentine. He showed a current balance of $7,754.66. I went through the ledger part of the book. There were entries for photographic equipment, for some men's clothing, quite a number for cash, and a parking ticket made out to parking clerk, City of Los Angeles, and the ticket. I decided it was a clue. I copied down the check number and the ticket number and got out the bottle of scotch that I kept in case I was bitten by a Gila monster. I poured myself a small snort and sipped it. There were no Gila monsters in sight, but you never knew. I was on the road early before the heat got hard. Marlowe, the commuting gumshoe. Works in L.A., lives in Poodle Springs. Spends 20 hours a day on the road. The desert was empty this early, except for tumbleweed and an occasional hawk with an eye out for breakfast. I got off the freeway at Spring Street and parked. Inside City Hall was a small room under the big central stairway. On the grimy, pebbled glass door, lettered in black, was Office of the Parking Clerk. I went in. Across the front of the room was a long counter. Behind a railing were 3 elderly female clerks. The line shuffled slowly forward. Old people, in worn clothing, paying parking fines with postal money orders. Sharp guys in flashy suits, trying to look like this was interrupting a day of important conferences. The clerk wheezed a little as she processed the tickets, very slowly. People were beginning to mutter. I turned and pushed through the crowd. Near the front door was a bank of payphones. I got one, put in my coin, and called the office of the parking clerk. An elderly female voice answered. "Yeah, this is Marlowe, Sheriff's Substation in Encino. I need a location on a parking ticket." I read her the ticket number. The line was silent for a few minutes, and then she was back. "The violation occurred in front of 1254 Western Avenue." 1254 Western Avenue was between Hollywood and Sunset Boulevards, next to a taco stand. The place looked like an ugly bread box fallen on hard times. On the wall beside the door was a directory, one of those black felt numbers with slots where white letters were inserted. The glass that covered it was fly-specked and stained with years of smog. There was no less Valentine listed. Of the 10 tenants, there was one photographer. Larry Victor, it said. Photo portraits. Same initials, I thought. Why not? The building smelled as if cats lived in the stairwells. Larry Victor was on the 3rd floor at the back. There was some light showing through the pebbled glass on his door. The lettering said, "Larry Victor, photographer, advertising, industrial, portraits a specialty." I knocked. No answer. I tried the knob. Locked. I didn't have my collection of passkeys, but I did carry in my inside pocket a tool I'd taken from a safe and loft guy once. It looked something like one of those dental tools that technicians use to scrape your teeth. I edged the nose inside the jam overlap and turned it. I was in. I closed the door behind me and looked around. The place looked like the kind of office I'd spent half my life in. An old roll-top desk, a wobbly swivel chair, an oak filing cabinet, and against one wall a big sheet of white paper taped up, a couple of still cameras on tripods, and some photographers' lamps grouped in front of it. The daylight poured in through a dirty skylight webbed with chicken wire. I went around and sat in the swivel chair. It didn't have to be this building, of course. The car could have been parked here, and Valentine could have gone up to Hollywood Boulevard looking for movie stars, or down to Sunset looking for excitement, or he could have caught a cab to Bakersfield, where he had about as much chance for either. Still, the car was tagged outside this building, and here was a photographer with the same initials. I inventoried the desk. On top was a picture of a pretty black-haired woman, maybe 25, with big dark eyes. The cubbyholes were stuffed mostly with bills, a lot of them unpaid. The lower left drawer held L.A. phone directories. The lower right drawer had a bottle of cheap scotch. I got up and went across to the file cabinet. The top drawer contained a car insurance policy, a package of paper cups, and a manila envelope. I opened the envelope. In it was a collection of 8x10 glossy prints of naked women doing a variety of tricks, some of them quite old. The other drawers were empty. I took the big envelope over to the desk and began to look at what there was. What there was porn. Pretty good quality. Some of it may be shot in front of the very white paper backdrop that stood to my right. It had been quite some time since pictures of people copulating had stimulated my libido, and this stuff was no different. The pictures were of generally attractive models, actresses, no doubt, soon-to-be stars, waiting for the right part. I flipped through the pictures and stopped. There, looking younger, as naked as she had been only a few days earlier, was Sandra Lee, posing suggestively with the same empty-eyed smile. I slipped it out of the pack, rolled it the short way, put a rubber band around it, and slipped it into my inside coat pocket. I rifled through the rest of the pictures without encountering anyone else I knew, and put the folder back in the file drawer. I went back and sat down in the swivel and put my feet up and thought about it a while. The coincidences were piling up. Photographer, same initials, picture of Sandra Lee. While I was thinking about these things, I heard a key scratch on the keyhole. There was no place to hide, so I kept sitting with my feet up. The door opened, and in came a guy who looked like a finalist in the Mr. Southern California pageant. He had longish blonde hair combed straight back. His face was tanned, he was slim, medium height, medium build. He wore a cream sport coat and white pants, and a black shirt with a big collar that spilled out over his lapels. When he saw me, he stopped, pulled his head back an inch, raised his eyebrows, and stared at me. "Don't be confused," I said. "I'm not you." "I can see that, chappie, but who the hell are you?" "You first," I said. "Me first? This is my office." "Aha! You must be Larry Victor." "Yes, I must. But I still don't know you, or why you're sitting in my chair, or how you got in." "Kind of like a nursery rhyme, isn't it?" I said. Victor stood with the door still open in case he needed to run. "Marlowe," I said. "I'm looking for a guy named Les Valentine." "You a cop?" "No." "I met Valentine at a card game. He took my marker for half a G and gave this address." Victor nodded. "Mind if I sit at my desk, Marlowe?" I stood, stepped aside, and he sat. "I think I'll have a short one," Victor said. "Join me?" "Sure." He rummaged the cheap scotch out of the drawer and poured some into a couple of paper cups. I had a swallow. It tasted like something you take for mange. Victor guzzled it down and poured another couple of inches. Then he leaned back in his swivel and tried to look easy. While he was looking easy, he edged a glance at the file cabinet. Then he looked back at me. "Funny thing," Victor said. "I know Les Valentine." "Amazing." "Not so amazing, really. We're both in the same line. Both do a lot of movie still work, publicity stuff, that sort of thing. Do a lot of high-fashion stuff, too." I glanced around the office. "Hey," he said. "Don't waste money on fancy front stuff, you understand? You got the goods, you don't need all that Hollywood flash." "I can see that you're not wasting time on that," I said. I swished a little more of his scotch around in my mouth. I might as well try to prevent cavities while I was at it. Victor was already pouring out a third slug. Maybe he was tougher than he looked. "So I know Les, like I was saying. Good photographer." "Where is he now?" "I heard he was out of the country." I believed that like I believed I was drinking Chivas Regal. "Some kind of work for the government. China, I think." He leaned back and savored his drink. Just a breezy guy passing the time, having a drink with a guy who'd broken into his office. He was as authentic as a starlet's smile. "Know a model named Sandra Lee?" "Sunny, of course. Any photographer would know Sunny. She's the top model on the coast." "Ever photograph her?" "Nah, never had the pleasure. I mean, I've been approached, but you know how it is, Marlowe. You got commitments, she's got commitments. We've never been able to get together." "Even when she was younger?" I said. I had no idea where I was going. I just wanted to keep it going. Something might surface. He shook his head. "When she was young, pal, I wasn't in the business. Sunny's no co-ed, you know." I nodded, and eased another small sip of the scotch, sort of sneaking around on it from the side. It was still putrid. "How about Manny Lipschultz?" I said. If it hit him oddly, he didn't show anything. He pursed his lips slightly and looked up at the corner of the room. Then he shook his head. "Nope," he said. "Swell name, though, ain't it?" I agreed that it was swell. We were all swell. Just a couple of swell guys sitting around lying to each other on a pleasant afternoon. I went out onto Western Avenue and sat in my car and waited. I was getting ready to tail a guy who wasn't the man I was looking for, except the guy was all wrong. You walk into your office and find a guy there, you don't sit down and drink with him, you call the buttons. About 20 minutes after I started sitting and waiting, Victor came out of his office building and headed down Western on foot. I waited until he got to the corner and got out of the Olds and hot-footed it after him, slowing to a casual walk when I reached Sunset. Victor was maybe 50 yards ahead. He didn't look around. He turned into a bar called Reno's. I let him settle in. Then I sidled in myself and slid into a booth. The waitress scowled at me. One guy in a booth for 4. I ordered a gimlet on the rocks and sipped it slowly, letting it work against the taste of Victor's deadly scotch. Victor was at the bar. Beside him was a blonde, her legs crossed, sitting sideways on the bar stool, leaning toward Victor. Her green and red tank top gaped a little at the back of her skirt. The only other person at the bar was an aging redhead wearing a white sequined sweater that was raveled at the sleeve. She was drinking Manhattans, and while I watched, the bartender brought her one and gestured toward Larry Victor. She took it, nodded her thanks at Victor, and dipped into it. Larry made a little salute back at her and turned his attention to La Blondie. I couldn't hear her, but it was clear that she was mad as hell. Victor kept shaking his head and muttering back at her. It would probably have been quiet if the redhead hadn't kept feeding the jukebox. The blonde took something that looked like a photo from her purse and shoved it toward him. Victor took a pair of rimless glasses from his shapeless sport coat and put them on. When he saw the picture, he quickly put his hand over it, palm flat, and looked around the room uncomfortably. Then he shoved the picture back at the blonde, took his glasses off, and put them away. The blonde picked up the photograph and put it back in her purse. The whole exchange probably hadn't lasted more than 20 seconds. But it had been enough for me to realize what bothered me about him. Except for the hair, he looked like the picture I'd seen of Les Valentine, and hair can be arranged. Victor stood up suddenly, slammed a 10 on the bar, and walked out like a man leaving his wife for good. The blonde sat, staring after him. I got up and went after Victor, being careful not to step into the blonde's gaze. It would have punched holes in my ribcage. He was halfway to the corner of Western when I came out of the bar. By the time he got his car from the curb near his office, I was in my Olds with the motor idling. He went west on Sunset until he hit the freeway and south to Venice Boulevard. I kept 2 or 3 cars between me and Victor and shifted lanes from time to time. He wasn't expecting to be tailed, and he had other things on his mind. I could have followed him in a Ferris wheel. I followed him down to the beach, and when he pulled in behind a beachfront bungalow, I went on past and parked under an olive tree between 2 trash barrels, under a sign that said, "Private parking. This means you." I walked past the backs of dank little clapboard houses. Behind Victor's house was a mailbox. The lettering on it said Larry and Angel Victor. In front of the houses was the beach walk, and then the beach, and then the fat Pacific Ocean. Larry Victor was sitting on a beach chair on his front porch with his feet up on the railing. Next to him was the black-haired young woman with big dark eyes from the picture on his desk. She had on some kind of loose-fitting Hawaiian dress which slid halfway up her thighs as she sat with her feet up beside Victor's. They were drinking Mexican beer from the bottle and holding hands. It was the kind of domestic scene that the insurance companies use when they try to tell you that enough life insurance will make you secure. I stood halfway between a patch of giant geraniums and watched. Marlowe, the all-seeing, sees all, peeps at everything. The girl leaned over and kissed Victor, and the kiss lingered and developed. When the ensuing struggle ended, Victor reached up in an automatic gesture and straightened his hair. I smiled. Bingo. Les Valentine with a hairpiece. I drove to the Springs in time for a late supper which Tino made up for me in the kitchen. Linda was at the racket club and didn't get home until I was finishing the last of the salad that Tino insisted on serving after the meal. "Well, darling," she said, "look at you, home from a hard day's gumshoeing. How nice." She came over and gave me a light kiss. I could smell the booze on her breath. "Would you like some supper too, Mrs. Marlowe?" "No, Tino, please, just a large Scotch, light soda on the rocks." Linda sat across from me in the kitchen. Tino brought her the drink. "Did you detect anything very good today, darling?" "I found Les Valentine." "How exciting for you. I'm sure it compensates for missing our dinner at the club with Mousie and Morton." "Perfect. Myrna Loy couldn't have read it better." "Don't be rude, darling. You did stand me up, you know." "I know. And I'm sorry I had to, but the whistle doesn't blow at cocktail time for me." "And I knew that when I married you," Linda said. There was nothing in that for me. I let it pass. "Don't you even want to be with me?" "Damn it, of course I want to be with you. I'd like to spend all my time in bed with you, having cocktails by the pool, helping you sort your lingerie. And if I give in to that, what am I? You could get me a little jeweled collar and we could go for walks." Linda stood and turned away from me, the drink half finished in her hand, and threw the glass at the sink. It missed and broke and splattered on the rug. She turned and collapsed into my lap with her mouth against mine. "You unbreakable bastard." I picked her up and headed for the bedroom. Money had its uses. Tino would clean up the drink. In the morning, Linda had a headache, and we stayed in bed drinking orange juice and coffee and waiting for the headache to dwindle. "You said last night that you found Muffy Blackstone's husband. I'm sure Mr. Lipschultz will be very proud of you." "If I tell him." "Why wouldn't you?" Linda said. I was looking at her profile, the way the fine vein pulsed in her lowered eyelids. "There appears to be a Mrs. Victor." Linda rolled her head over so she was full-faced to me. "Is there really?" she said. "That timid water-bug of a man?" "In L.A. he wears a rug and no glasses, a regular stallion." "A rug?" "A toupee, long blonde, smoothed back. Dresses like the agent for a B-picture starlet." I reached over to my bed table and got the rolled-up picture of Sandra Lee. I handed it to Linda. "He specializes in this type of picture." Linda looked at the photograph. "Oh," she said. She peeked at it again. Her eyebrows came together in the loveliest frown I'd ever seen. "Muffy's husband takes pictures like this?" "Hundreds." "How did you find them?" "I burgled his office." "Don't tell." She wrinkled her nose. "So why don't you tell Mr. Lipschultz?" "I don't know. It's just that he and the other wife, I followed him home." She was glad to see him. I shrugged. "Well, what about Muffy?" Linda said. "Yeah." "Oh." Then she turned the picture face down and turned back to me. "I'm feeling ever so much better." I was beginning to feel like a pinball bouncing back and forth between Poodle Springs and L.A. Hollywood Boulevard looked like it always did in the morning, like a hooker with her makeup off. I parked near Wilton and walked back to Western. I had Sandra Lee's picture in my pocket. It was time to talk with Larry, Les. The stairs still smelled of old dampness and sour lives as I went up. Victor's office door was unlocked and I went in. He wasn't there. But something was. She was in his swivel chair, tilted back, her arms hanging stiffly down. There was a small hole in the middle of her forehead with the flesh around it puffy and discolored. Her mouth was open, and her stiffened lips were curved with the harsh rictus smile I'd seen too often. I could feel my stomach clench. Under the dried blood smell I could still detect the lingering odor of cordite. I closed the office door and looked down at the dead woman's face. She was the blonde who had argued with Larry Victor in Reno's cafe. I touched her cheek. The skin was cold. There was a puddle of dried blood on the floor behind her chair. I knew what I would have to do eventually, but first I went to the file cabinet and opened it. The pictures were gone. I looked over the rest of the office. Nothing else seemed to be missing. I looked again at the blonde's dead face, took in a deep breath and dialed the cops. The first to arrive were a couple of deputies from the West Hollywood Sheriff's Station on San Vicente. They came in wearing the usual wary expressions behind the usual sunglasses. One of them knelt to check the body, the other one talked to me. "You touch anything?" His voice was hard. "The phone." "How come?" In a voice that sounded like I'd better have a good reason. "To call you." He nodded. The other one stood up. "Been dead a while," he said. The first one grunted. "What's your story?" "I'm a private cop. I came here to see Larry Victor." "What did you come to see Victor about?" "Case I'm working on." "You got some ID?" I got out my wallet and showed him. "What's the case?" "Right now there's nothing here that tells me my case has anything to do with your case. If it does, then I'll have to tell you, but right now I don't." "Listen, smart guy," the first cop said. "You don't decide what's related to our case. We do." "We?" "You guys are babysitters. As soon as homicide shows up, you'll be out logging meter violations." "Okay, big mouth. Hands behind the back." At which point Bernie Olds came in smoking one of his toy cigars and looking like a man who got plenty of exercise. He was the DA's chief investigator. "Annoying the prowl car boys again, Marlowe?" The two sheriff's deputies didn't exactly stand to attention, but they straightened up visibly. The first cop stopped with the handcuffs half off his belt. "Olds," Bernie said, "DA's office." "Yes, sir, Lieutenant, we know." Bernie smiled and nodded toward the door. "We've got it now." And the two deputies went out of the office. Olds walked over and looked down at the dead woman. He was a medium-sized guy with blond hair and stiff white eyebrows. His pale blue eyes were very calm. He spoke in a pleasant, cop-smart voice that was always a hair too casual to trust. There were two other county employees with him, both in plain clothes. They didn't pay any attention to me. "Close up," Olds said as he looked down at the body. "Small caliber gun, probably hot-loaded. Made a much bigger hole going out, I'd say, than going in." "Know her?" "No," I said. He looked up and hard at me. "You being cute?" "Not yet." The M.E. appeared, a short, fat guy wearing a suit and a vest, with a large cigar tucked into his mouth. Two lab guys came in behind him and began to dust for fingerprints. "Come on," Olds said to me, and we went out into the tight hallway. "Tell me your story." "Missing person job out of the Springs. Trail led here. I talked to the guy in the office. He said he couldn't help me. I went away, looked around some more, found some things that didn't make sense, and came back to talk to this guy again. The door was open. I walked in and found her." "Guy's name Larry Victor?" "That's the name on the door." "You know where he is now?" "No." "Anything else you can tell me?" "No." "I suppose if I asked you the name of your client, you wouldn't tell me." "Guy in my line, Bernie, doesn't get ahead telling the cops who he's working for if he doesn't have to." "And who decides if he has to?" Olds said. I shrugged. "We work it out." "Sure we do." He took the toy cigar out of his mouth, dropped it on the floor, and ground it out with his foot. "Stay in touch," Olds said, and turned and went back into the office. I couldn't see any space in there for me, so I left. I went west on Santa Monica Boulevard with my foot heavy on the gas pedal. It wouldn't take the Buttons very long to find out where Larry Victor lived, and then somebody would cruise down there and pick him up. I wanted to get there first, and I wasn't sure exactly why. I made it to Venice Beach in 25 minutes, and my right leg was a little shaky when I climbed out of the Olds behind Victor's beachfront house. There was no squad car in sight. I knocked on the sliding glass door. The dark-haired young woman I'd seen with Victor before came to the door and slid it a short way open. "Yes?" "Marlowe," I said. "I need to see Larry Victor quick." She smiled and slid the door wider. "Come in, Mr. Marlowe. Larry's fixing us drinks. Would you like one?" "In a minute we'll all need one," I said. As I spoke, Victor came out of the kitchen with a pitcher and 2 glasses. He looked at me. "What the hell do you want?" he said. "I can't take the time to explain," I said. "You'll have to take my word. There's a dead woman in your office, and the cops are on the way." Angel's eyes widened. Victor said, "A dead woman?" I said, "Come on, get in my car. Angel, tell the cops you don't know where he is." I took Victor's arm. "It's me or a long night downtown," I said. I pulled Victor with me and went out the front door. "Larry," Angel yelled after us, "call me." "Get rid of the 2 glasses," I said. Then I had Victor in my car, and we were rolling onto Venice Boulevard, heading east. "Okay," he said. "What's going on?" I told him all of it. "I didn't kill her," Victor said. "I don't even know what she was doing in my office." "She was the blonde you had a fight with the other day in Reno's bar." Victor stared at me for a moment. His mouth opened and closed, like a tropical fish. "I followed you," I said. "Followed me?" "Try not to say everything I say. I followed you to Reno's, and then I followed you home. Is Angel your wife?" "Yes," he said. "And is Muriel Valentine your wife?" "Muriel Valentine? I told you not to do that," I said. "Who's Muriel Valentine?" "Les Valentine's wife," I said. "I saw a picture of him in her house. If you put on your glasses and took off your rug, you'd look just like him." "So what's the deal?" he said. His voice was heavy. "Do I call you Larry or Les?" I said. He didn't answer. "You legally married to Angel?" He still didn't answer. "This is certainly pleasant," I said. "No smart guy remarks, no lies, just the soothing sound of my own questions." I got the picture of Sandra Lee out of my inside pocket and slipped the band off and unrolled it with one hand while I drove. It was nothing compared to brain surgery. "I assume when you took this she was just starting out." I handed the picture to him. He took it, still silent. Then he said, "Jesus Christ, Marlowe." "Things fall apart," I said. "Murder does that. You have it all rolled up and folded away neat, and then there's a murder and everything unravels." "The cops know about me?" he said. "Not from me. When I left them, they just had the corpse in your office." "You were there?" "Stiff a minute, Marlowe," I said. "I went there to talk with you about being Larry Victor and Les Valentine. I'll call you Larry around here. Door was open. She was there. In your chair. Somebody had shot her with a small caliber gun." "And you took that picture from my files?" "No, I took it last time I was there. This time your files were empty." "No pictures?" "No pictures." "What's your racket, Marlowe?" "Private license," I said. "I was hired to find you." "Who, Muriel?" "Lipschultz," I said. His eyes widened. "Lippy?" I nodded. "For the markers?" "Uh-huh." "You found out an awful lot awful fast." "I'm a curious guy," I said. "You trying to build a stake to get out of the Springs?" "Yeah. The Springs, Muriel, her old man, all of it." "You married to Angel?" "Yeah." "Before or after Muriel?" "Before." "Cute," I said. "Let me guess. You met Muriel someplace, maybe shooting some pictures." "Yeah." "And she liked you, and you saw the big burrito after dancing all your life for dimes. Angel know you married her?" "No, she thinks I go away on photography assignments." "So you were going to get your hand in Muriel's trust fund and disappear with Angel?" "Something like that," he said. "Except you couldn't get the dough." He shook his head. "Not a score," he said. "Not a bundle." "So you tried to parlay it at the Agony Club and found out that it's hard to beat the house. They don't play against suckers like you more than 50-100 times a day." "I win a lot." "As much as you lose?" He didn't answer. Finally he spoke without looking back at me. "So how come you didn't tell them? How come you came tearing out here ahead of the cops?" "I'm a romantic," I said. "A what?" "I saw you and Angel together the other night. You looked happy." He stared at me. "You are a piece of work, Marlowe." "Reasonably priced, too," I said. The shopping crowd had thinned as housewives went home to start dinner and get it on the table before hubby got his third Manhattan in. The first trickle of the commuter flood was beginning to slow down on Sepulveda, heading north toward the valley. I took the pipe out of my coat pocket and packed it and got it going right and leaned back in my seat against the door. "I didn't kill her," Victor said. "Say you didn't for the moment. Say you're a shifty bastard and a bigamist and a compulsive gambler and a pornographer, but say I don't see you for murder. Tell me how she ends up in your office with a bullet hole in her forehead." "That's pretty rough, Marlowe." "It's nowhere as rough as it's going to be when you're down in the Hall of Justice in the back room where the cops sit around with their feet on the railing." "If they find me," he said. "Find you? You poor simp. I found you in 3 days on a skipped IOU. You think the cops can't find you on suspicion of murder one? You think I was the only person to see you argue with that blonde in Reno's? What was her name? I don't know. Lola something. I hardly knew her. What were you arguing about? I used to date her. Uh-huh, but you don't know her last name. He shrugged. You meet a lot of Jillies. You sleep with them. They get to thinking it's more serious than you do. But serious enough to tell you their last name, I said. Well, I suppose she said, but hey, I can't remember every name, huh? Remember this one, pal, or I'll drive you straight downtown. He pretended to be thinking hard. Her name was Faithful, Lola Faithful. I think maybe she used to hoof it a little, probably a stage name. And she was mad because you weren't dating her anymore? She was mad as hell, Marlowe. How long you been married to Angel? 3 years and 7 months. Break up with Lola before that? Sure, hell, what kind of a guy you think I am? I don't want to know. Broke up with Lola long before we got married. As soon as I started going with Angel, I tossed her over. Mm-hmm, I said. So like 4 years ago, you ditched Lola Faithful, and a few days ago she braces you in a bar and starts screaming about it? She carries a torch, Marlowe, not my fault. I've heard sailors tell better stories to Filipino barmaids, I said. Well, if you don't believe me, why the hell are you sitting here? 2 things, maybe 3. 1, you're not the type. You're a con man, a booster. I don't think you've got the iron in your bones that it takes to kill a man. You ever kill anybody, tough guy? 2nd, I said, why would you kill her there in your office and leave her there and not even lock the door? Yeah, he said, I'm not that stupid. We'll see, I said. You said maybe 3 reasons. What's the other one? Like I said, I'm a romantic. Victor turned toward me. Christ, Marlowe, I got no place to go the cops wouldn't think of. They know about Muriel? No, Jesus, nobody knows about her. Go there, I said. Muriel's? Why not? She's your wife, she thinks. It's your house. He shook his head. It's her house. Her and her old man's. You rather spend the night in the lockup? How am I going to get there? I live there. It's on my way home. Marlowe? Holy Christ, are you the guy that married Harlan Potter's daughter? She married me. For Christ's sake, you live right down the street from me. Small world, I said. We rode a lot of the way in silence. Victor said about every 15 minutes that he wished he had a cigarette. As we passed Bakersfield, I said, Tell me about Muriel's father. Clayton Blackstone? I could hear Victor take in air and let it out through his nose. Yeah. Rich and mean, Victor said. It's how you get rich, I said. He got rich a lot of ways, Victor said, not all of them legal. Blackstone made his money out of gambling. Ships off the coast out past the 3-mile limit, Victor said. Get anything you wanted out there then. Cards, dice, roulette, a horse parlor. You could get girls, booze, marijuana, coke, and this was in the days when high school kids never heard of it. Sure, I said. Picked you up in water taxis at the pier in Bay City. Now he owns banks, hotels, clubs, and restaurants, but he's still got people around. Tough guys, I said. Guys that'll kick out your teeth and then shoot you for mumbling. He connected with the Agony Club, I said. Nah, Lippy runs that. Lippy says his boss is a guy named Blackstone, and that Blackstone is a hard number about the books. Jesus, Victor said, I didn't know that. He rubbed both eyes with the heels of his open hands. Well, old Clayton isn't going to hack me while I'm married to his daughter. Unless he finds out you're also married to Angel, I said. Jesus Christ, Marlowe. The Poodle Springs turnoff loomed out of the night. I felt 1,000,000 miles from anywhere, no closer to civilization than to the stars that glimmered without warmth above me, alone in the darkness listening to the whining litany of a weak man who tried to be too cute. How do you get along with Blackstone? I said. You don't get along with a guy like Blackstone, Victor said. He tolerates you or he doesn't. Me he tolerates because I belong to Little Muffy. I could hear the sound of bitterness that tinged his words like the bite of an underripe orange. Here's how it looks to me, I said. Lippy wants you because you owe him money. The cops want you because you might have killed Lola Faithfull. Blackstone tolerates you, but if he finds out about Angel, he may let some air into your skull." "Yeah," Victor said. He was staring down at his thumbs. "I don't care about myself, Marlowe, but we gotta protect Angel. I could tell, just knowing you as I do, that your life is a long, unbroken sequence of self-sacrifice and concern for others. Honest to God, Marlowe, I love that girl. Maybe the only thing I ever loved. Guys would laugh probably, but I'd turn myself in today if it would help her. But I can't, because if Blackstone found out about us, he'd have her killed too." "Well, if you can restrain your passion for self-sacrifice and keep your mouth shut and hide out with your Poodle Springs wife until I figure this out." I didn't have a finish for the sentence. Neither did he. We were silent until I dropped him in front of Muriel's place. He took off his hairpiece, put it in my glove compartment, and walked wearily up the walk. As he reached the door, I saw his shoulders straighten. I put the Olds in gear and drove on toward the house I shared with Linda. "Clayton Blackstone is a very dignified man," Linda said. "I don't believe all that stuff that Muffy's husband told you." We were having breakfast by the pool. There was a scent of bougainvillea on the air and the sound of birds, foraging in the morning before the heat got too bad. "It's a question of law whether he's her husband," I said. "I think the first marriage precludes those that follow." I sipped my coffee. Some sort of Kona roast that Tino had shipped to him. On the other hand, I'm not up on my bigamy law. "Clayton Blackstone is a friend of Daddy's." Linda was wearing a pale blue silk thing that concealed enough of her to be legal, but only that. "I don't know where Daddy got his money," I said, "but if you have enough of it, some of it has to be dirty." "You think my father has been dishonest?" "I think he probably at least allowed a little dishonesty." "Oh, pooh," Linda said. Tino came and took away the empty juice glasses. "Obviously Les or Larry or whatever he calls himself is a compulsive gambler. Obviously he's a fortune hunter. Obviously he's dishonest. Why are you protecting him?" Linda said. "Report to Mr. Lipschultz where he is, and get to spend some afternoons with me, drinking gimlets and holding hands and, whatever." "He doesn't understand it either," I said. "Les? I should think he wouldn't, the worm. What kind of a man would get himself into this kind of a mess?" Linda's eyes were bright with distaste. "He's a compulsive gambler. It's risk, the danger of losing, that gets the juices going." "He likes to lose?" Linda said. She leaned a little toward me, holding her little blue wisp of a garment together so that she could maintain the semblance of decency and keep me from getting out of hand. "No, but he likes the chance of losing," I said. "It excites him. Now there's too much danger. He's not getting a thrill out of it. Now he's scared. And I don't think he killed the woman in his office." "You understand this man very well," Linda said. "I'm a detective, lady. I meet a lot of people in trouble." "Maybe you do the work you do because it's dangerous." "Like Larry Victor? I get a thrill out of danger?" "There must be some reason," Linda said, "why you don't stay home and help me spend $30 million. "Maybe I could get a little gold ring grafted onto my neck," I said, "and you could wear me on your charm bracelet." "You really are impossible, aren't you?" Linda said. "Fortunately, I find you scrumptious." "I know that," I said. There was a Santa Ana wind blowing. The sky was as blue as a cornflower when I parked and walked back to Reno's cafe. It was just afternoon and most of the hookers had broken for lunch. I went to the bar and sat at one end. There was no one else in the place. The bartender slid down the bar. He had the color of a man who goes out only at night. "What'll it be, pal?" "Rye," I said, straight up. He poured me a shot of Old Overholt, rang up the cost, and put the check on the bar in front of me. I nodded, and he went down the bar and began to polish glasses with a towel better suited to other purposes. I sipped my rye. A fly circled slowly in on the wet spot where my glass had sat. It lazed down close to it, its translucent wings blurred. Then it landed and sampled some and rubbed its forefeet together in appreciation. A red-haired woman came in and sat 2 stools away. It was the same woman who had played the jukebox during Lola's argument with Victor. "White wine, Willie," she said. The bartender got a big jug and poured some in a glass and set it in front of her on a napkin. She picked up the wine and looked at it for a moment, and then carefully drank maybe half the glass. She smiled, then turned toward me. "Got a light?" she said. I got a kitchen match out of my coat and managed to snap it into flame with my thumbnail on the first try. She leaned forward and put the tip of her cigarette into the flame, took a deep inhale and let the smoke out slowly. Her hair was red, brighter than any god had ever made, but probably a version of its original shade. Even in the dim bar I could see fine vertical lines on her upper lip and the cross-hatching of fine lines around her eyes. "Wine, cigarettes, and a good man," she said. "All anyone can ask of life." She drank the rest of her wine and gestured with her head for the bartender to pour some more. "Easy to get wine and cigarettes. Hard as hell to find a good man, and God knows I've tried a lot of 'em." Her wine was gone. "Willie," I said, "lady needs a refill. Put it on my tab." Willie decanted the jug wine without comment, rang it up on my bill. "Thanks. You seem too nice a guy to be hanging out here." I was going to say that about you. I could see my face in the mirror. It had the innocent, oily look of a coyote stealing a chicken. "I was here the other day and saw you," I said. "There was an argument. Man and woman were hollering at each other, and you were playing the jukebox." Her cigarette had burned away to an unsmokable roach in the ashtray. She dug another from her purse, and I had the kitchen match ready. I'd have made a great manservant. "Yeah, Lola and Larry. Are they a trip? What I mean about men, you know." "What were they fighting about?" Val's shrug was elaborate. "What's your name, honey?" "Marlowe." "Ever been in love, Marlowe?" "As we speak." "Well, wait till it goes sour. When it goes sour, it's like rotting roses. It reeks." "Lola and Larry?" "For a while back." She shook her head. "But he dumped her." "What was the fight the other day specifically about?" "She had something she knew. She was going to get even, I guess." She drank. "A woman spurned," she said heavily. "We were made for love. We can get pretty poisonous when it turns." "She had something on him." "Sure, and she was going to make him pay." "What'd she have?" "Hell, Marlowe, I don't know. There's always something. Probably something on you if somebody looks hard." "You know Larry, too?" She nodded and fished in her purse. "Got any quarters?" I slid a 5 at Willie. He made change and put the quarters on the bar in front of me. "You're a gentleman," Val said, and walked to the jukebox. She came back as the first wail of a country song came on about a woman who loved a man and he'd done her wrong. "What was you asking me?" "Did you know Larry very well?" I said carefully. Drunks are fragile creatures. They need to be carried like a very full glass, tip either way, and they spill all over. "I used to pose for Larry, you know." "Larry usually take women's pictures with their clothes off?" "Sure. Larry looked at more nudes than my gynecologist." She laughed and wheezed until she got coughing, and I had to beat her on the back to get her to stop. "Did he ever do fashion stuff?" She paused a long time. Time is different for drunks. "No. He said he did, but I never saw any." "Where'd Lola live?" "Kenmore, 222 Kenmore, just below Franklin." "Nobody mad at her or anything?" Val grinned. Her lipstick had gotten blurred from frequent trips to the rim of her glass. "Just Larry." "Because of the fight they had?" "Uh-huh." Val drank some more wine. Some of it dribbled down her chin. She paid it no mind. She was singing along now, softly, to the mournful music. "You want to dance?" she said. "You used to dance like a swan." She was swaying a little to the music. "As long as it's slow," I said. I stood and put out my arms. As I did, she suddenly went limp on me. I slid both my arms around her and edged her to a booth. Behind the bar, Willie watched. I got out another 20. They were getting scarce in my wallet. I walked over to the bar and gave it to Willie. When she comes around, put her in a cab. You spending an awful lot of dough on an old wino floozy, Willie said. I got a rich wife, I said. I paid the bar bill with my last 20 and went out of there into the hot, hard, unkind sun. Number 222 is on the left side as you drive up Kenmore toward Franklin. It was one of those comfortable, cool bungalows with big front porches that they used to build at about the time that L.A. was a sprawling, comfortable place with a lot of sunshine and no smog. People used to sit on those porches in the evening and sip iced tea and watch the neighbors water their lawn with long, loping sweeps of a hose. They used to sleep with the front door open and the screen door held with a simple hook. Sometimes on Sundays they'd take one of the interurban trains out to the beach for a picnic. The lawn had gone to hell. The grass was so high it had gone to seed. The front door was locked, but the frame had shrunk up so that it didn't take much to get in. I put the flat of my hand against the door and pushed, and I was in. The place smelled like places do that had been closed up empty for a while. To the right, through an archway, was the sitting room. There was a couch there with a crocheted throw on it, turned back as if someone had been under it and just gotten up. There were some movie magazines and a true romance magazine. The late afternoon light, as it sifted through the dusty muslin curtains, picked up dust in the air. The cops would have seen all this, and anything that mattered would be down in a box in property storage with a case tag on it. Still, they didn't know all the things I knew, and I was hoping I might see something that wouldn't have meant anything to them. I moved to the kitchen. It had gotten dark. I snapped on a light. If the cops had a watch on the place, they'd have seen me come in and would be here by now. The neighbors would just think I was another cop. There were 3 or 4 limes turning yellow in a Pyrex dish on the kitchen counter, and some instant coffee in a jar in the cupboard. That was it. No flour, no salt, no meat, no potatoes. The limes were probably for scurvy. I pulled over a chair and climbed up and looked inside the glass globe on the kitchen light. While I was doing that, a voice behind me said, "Hold that pose, sailor." I had a gun in a shoulder rig, but it might as well have been in the trunk of my car for all the good it did me, standing on a chair with my hands over my head. "Now put your hands on top of your head and step down off of there," the voice said. I managed to keep my hands over my head and get off the chair without dislocating a kneecap. "Turn around," the voice said with the softness of a snake's hiss. I turned around. There were 2 of them. One was a California beach boy, lots of tan, lots of muscle, just enough brains to know the handle of a blackjack. He was holding a Colt .45 automatic, not aimed at anything special, but generally toward me. The other guy was shorter and slimmer. His dark eyes had no feeling in them at all. The voice belonged to him. "So, sailor, why don't you sort of tell me about who you are, and how come you're standing on a chair in the kitchen here, stuff like that?" "Who's asking?" He smiled without any feeling at all and pointed at the beach boy's automatic. "Oh," I said, "him. I've met him before. He doesn't impress me." He looked at the beach boy. "Everybody's tough," he said. "You want me to shoot some corner of him, Eddie, so he'll know we mean it?" Eddie shook his head. "My name's Eddie Garcia." He nodded at the beach boy. "This is J.D." "If he pulls the trigger on that thing, can he hit what it's pointed at?" I said. "From this close?" Eddie smiled. "We represent a very important person who has an interest in this house and its occupant, and we wish to report to him what you were doing in here and why. We would rather do that than deliver your body to him in the trunk of our car." "My name's Marlowe. I'm a private eye working on a case. How about you take me to your VIP and I tell him the rest? Maybe our interests would mesh." Garcia nodded. There was no expression. I assumed he was thinking. "Okay, sailor. You ride with us." We went out in single file. Garcia got in behind the wheel of a Lincoln Town car. J.D. and I got in the back. We rolled west on Franklin. No one spoke. We went down to Sunset past Bel Air Gate and wound along until Garcia stopped the car in front of a pair of 10-foot spiked iron gates. A guy in a blue blazer stepped out of the sentry box. I could see him pick up a phone. In a moment the gates opened slowly and Garcia drove us through. We went down a small hill, wound up a somewhat higher one, and turned a corner. The house that rose up in front of us wasn't anywhere near big enough to hold all of California. Probably no more than the entire population of Los Angeles comfortably. White masonry with gables and towers and narrow Tudor windows. "It's a little showy," Garcia said. He got out of the car. "Wait here, J.D." Garcia walked toward the front door. I went after him. The ceiling rose 30 or 40 feet, and from it hung an enormous iron chandelier in which candles flickered. On the wall were tapestries of medieval knights on plump horses. A butler appeared. "Follow me, please," he said. We went through the library into some sort of space that, had it been 3 times smaller, might have been somebody's office. Behind a desk big enough to land helicopters on, wearing an actual red velvet smoking jacket, was a hatchet-faced man with ice-white hair. I'd seen his picture on a wall once. He looked at me the way a wolf looks at the lamb chop. "Guy's name is Marlowe, Mr. Blackstone. He thinks he's tough, and he thinks he's funny. I don't think he's either." There was nothing there for me. I let it pass. "We found him in that house on Kenmore. Says he's a PI. Said he wanted to see you. I figured you might want to talk with him." Blackstone shifted his stare to me. His eyes were almost gray. "You know that Lola Faithfull is dead?" "Yeah. Shot in the head with a small caliber gun at close range. I found the body, and that sort of made me wonder about who shot her." Blackstone stared at me for a moment. Then he looked at Garcia, then back at me. "I too would like to know who murdered her." "I had a sense you might be interested. About the time your boys threw down on me in Lola's house." "I don't know Lola Faithfull." "So it's who killed her that you're worried about." "Cops like the photographer," he said. "Cops like the obvious. Usually they're right." "You like him?" Blackstone said. "No. He doesn't seem the type." "You ever a cop?" "Yeah," I said. "Now I'm not. Cops can't decide that someone doesn't seem the type. They've seen too many axe murderers that look like choir boys." "You seem a romantic, Mr. Marlowe." "And you don't, Mr. Blackstone." "Not often." "Did you know I know your daughter?" Blackstone didn't say anything. It was what he did instead of showing surprise. "I didn't know that." "She's married to the photographer," I said. He looked at me silently. "Mr. Marlowe, you and I should have a drink." I was sitting in one of the green leather chairs. "Less owe a guy money," I said. I had a big scotch and soda, with scotch from a crystal decanter and soda from a siphon. Blackstone had the same. Garcia had nothing. He simply existed over the bar in total relaxation. And the guy hired me to locate Les for him. "Who's the guy?" Blackstone said. I shook my head. "Client's got a right to be anonymous. If I'm going to be in this business, I can't go around spilling my guts." Anyway, I sipped a little scotch. It seemed to seep into my mouth and spread gently. You could probably spend my weekly earnings for a bottle of this stuff. It seemed simple enough. "Only it wasn't," Blackstone said. "2 things I'd like to know," I said. I drank some more of the scotch and paused to admire it. 1, why were you looking for Valentine? And 2, why did you have Garcia watching Lola's house? "You seem to have been candid with me up to a point. I'm looking for Valentine because he's been away and my daughter was worried. Lola Faithfull attempted to blackmail my daughter." "About what?" Blackstone shook his head. "My daughter did not say, and I did not ask. I told my daughter that I would have Eddie speak to her. Eddie was away on business for a day or so, and when he returned, he went to call on Lola, only to find that she had been murdered." Blackstone sampled his scotch. It didn't seem to amaze him. He was used to it. "You can understand my interest," he said. I nodded. "And your daughter?" I merely told her that the woman had died. I did not ask her anything. "How do you feel about Les Valentine, Mr. Blackstone?" Blackstone took some air in slowly through his nose. "He's a liar, a womanizer, a petty thief, an opportunist, a compulsive gambler with no more spine than a dandelion, and my daughter loves him. As long as she does, he is one of nature's noblemen to me. I will support him. I will intercede with those who bear him ill will. As long as he is married to my daughter, he is family." "Even though he's a wrong G?" "I indulge my daughter entirely, doubtless for selfish reasons. If she wishes to be married to a wrong G, then he will become, so to speak, my wrong G." "The wrong G is home," I said. I delivered him myself. "So you weren't telling me everything," Blackstone said. "I never said I was." "You're an interesting man, Marlowe. I can admire that. But do not make the mistake of confusing admiration with patience. I can eliminate you by nodding my head, and if it suits my purposes, I will." "Anybody can eliminate anybody, Mr. Blackstone. Once you realize that, it all gets into perspective. Be careful, Mr. Marlowe. I'm not a playful man. Take him home, Eddie. When you get there, give him back his gun." "Lola's place would be fine," I said. I didn't finish searching it. Blackstone almost smiled. "Take him where he wants to go, Eddie." This time J.D. drove and Eddie rode in back with me. When we got to Kenmore, J.D. stopped in front of Lola's house. It was silent. The street was dark. There was a high, pale moon shining straight down on us. Garcia handed me my gun. I stowed the gun under my arm and got out of the car. J.D. slid it into gear. I gave it the gunman's salute as they drove away. It was 3:37 on my wristwatch by moonlight when I came out of Lola Faithful's house. I hadn't found anything, but on the other hand, no one else had come and pointed a gun at me. It was too late to go home. I drove slowly. Hollywood was empty. Only the neon lights along Sunset were still awake. They were always awake. Bright, hearty, and fake. Full of Hollywood promises. I tried to figure out why I was here, alone in the night on Sunset, musing about neon. I had a beautiful wife at home in a comfortable bed. If I got into bed with her now, she'd roll toward me and put one arm around me. What the hell difference did it make if Les Valentine had killed Lola Faithful? I drove past Larry's building. Something moved in the doorway. Probably just a bum. Why not take a second look? It didn't matter. Huddled back, trying to avoid the light, was Angel, the other wife. I got out of the car, and when I did, she dashed out of the doorway. What I needed, a foot race. I took in a deep inhale and headed out after her. I caught her after she had rounded the corner at Hollywood. I might not have caught her at all, but she broke one of the high heels on her shoes. She was breathing very hard and didn't quite get who I was. I held her arms while she tried to pull away. "It's me, Marlowe, the Moonlight Knight, the shabby savior of ladies in doorways." "Where's Larry?" she said. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked at the spotlight that was suddenly in my eyes from the car that had swung around the corner. "Hold it right there," a voice said. It was a cop voice. "Hands on the car, Jack," one of them said. I put my hands on the roof of the car. One of them kicked my legs apart and patted me down. He took the gun from under my arm. Made me wonder why I carried it. People kept taking it away. "Got some ID?" he said. I fished my wallet out again and handed it over, and the cop looked at the contents in the light of the spotlight. "My name's Bob Kane," he said as he handed me back my wallet. "You mind telling me why you were chasing this lady?" "I wanted to give her a ride home." Kane smiled happily. "Hear that, Gordy?" he said to his fat partner. "Guy just wanted to drive her home." "No shit," Gordy said. "She didn't seem to want to ride home," Kane said. "She kind of looked to be running like hell to get away from you." She didn't recognize me. "You know this guy?" Kane said. His eyes were pleasant and heartless. "He's a friend of my husband's." "Yeah?" Kane stepped back and folded his long arms and looked at us for a while. "Marlowe," he said, "aren't you the guy found the body in her husband's office and you just happen to run into his wife and chase her and she runs because she doesn't recognize you?" "Exactly," I said. "If I was a smart copper," Kane said, "I wouldn't be out here around 4 o'clock in the morning on stakeout, so this is probably too deep for me, but it looks kind of a funny set of circumstances if you follow me." "You're too modest." "Yeah, been a failing of mine." I shrugged. "You want this guy to give you a ride home, Mrs. Victor?" Angel nodded. "Fine," Kane said. "Go ahead." "Bob," Gordy said, "you ought to haul him in." "For what?" "Hell, for questioning. Hold him until morning. Let the lieutenant talk with him." "Lady's worried about her husband," Kane said. "We'll let him take her home." "Damn it, Bob," Gordy said. "Gordy, one of us is a sergeant and one of us isn't. You remember whether it's me or you?" "You, Bob." Kane nodded. "Okay, why don't you go ahead and drive Mrs. Victor on home, Mr. Marlowe? We'll be moseying along behind just to sort of keep track." He handed me back my gun. I put it under my arm so it would be there when the next guy wanted to take it away, and Angel and I went on down to my car and pulled away. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the headlights of the unmarked car falling behind us. "Where's Larry?" Angel said. She was small on the front seat beside me. The dashboard clock said 4:07. "I can't wait to see him," she said. "Can't?" I said. "You'd lead the cops right to him. They have a tail on you." She turned in the seat and stared back at the headlights behind us. "Following me?" It was as if the last half hour hadn't happened. "Yes, ma'am." "Is he all right?" "He's fine, Angel. He's safe. He misses you." She nodded. "I miss him. Larry's in trouble, isn't he?" "He's wanted for murder." "But he didn't do that. He's in some other kind of trouble," she said. "The kind that brought you to him." In the moonlight, the buildings looked stately, like Moorish castles. The peeling paint and crumbled stucco smoothed out. "There's a gambler named Lipschultz," I said. "Larry owes him money. He hired me to find him." She nodded, a nod of confirmation. "He's an artist. He's not good with rules. He has an artistic temperament." "He ever been in other kinds of trouble?" She was silent for a bit, looking out at the silver ocean rolling slowly toward us. "I think he's had some trouble with women." "Like what?" "I don't know. He never said. I don't question him." "Why not?" "I love him," she said, as if it answered all the questions. "So what makes you think there was trouble with women?" "There were phone calls for him from a woman, and when he hung up he was angry, and there was a picture I saw of a woman. She was undressed and posing. If the light had been better, I think I'd have seen her blushing." "And you didn't ask him about it?" "No. It was from the time in Larry's life before he met me. He had a right to that. It had nothing to do with me." "You trust him?" "In the way you mean, yes. He loves me too." "He sure as hell ought to," I said. We pulled up behind the house where she and Larry lived, when Larry wasn't living with his other wife in Poodle Springs. The cop stopped a little ways behind us. "I'll walk you to the door." "No need," she said. There was the lilt of anxiety in her voice. "Just to see that you get in safe. I'm in love, too, with my wife." Angel smiled suddenly, like sunrise after a rainy night. "That's lovely," she said, "isn't it?" "Yeah." We walked down the alley to her front door, and she unlocked it and let herself in. "Thanks," she said. Then she closed the door. I heard the bolt slide and turned and headed back to the Olds. When I got in and pulled away, the cops blinked their lights once and then shut them off and settled in to watch. Linda didn't like me staying away overnight. I didn't like it too much myself, but there wasn't much to be done about it. When we had talked about that for most of the late morning, I got to eat some eggs and go to sleep. It was a little after 4 when I was up again, showered, shaved, smelling like a desert flower and tougher than 2 armadillos, on my way to the Agony Club to report to my employer. In the bright sun, the parking lot was as empty as it had been last time. I walked in through the door that seemed always slightly ajar. Maybe it was Lippy's trademark, always an open door for a sucker. This time the two gunmen weren't around. Lippy was getting careless. I walked across the gambling hall and knocked on Lippy's door. No answer. I turned the knob. Even before I found him, I knew what I'd find. The smell of death was there when the door opened. Lippy was in his swivel chair behind his desk with his back to me. His head hung down, chin on his chest. His hands rested on the arms, stiffened now in death, the fingers beginning to bloat. No sign of struggle, no sign of robbery. I went back out into the casino and walked around feeling the emptiness of the place. The two bodyguards were nowhere. Probably in the unemployment office. Maybe I was in the wrong business. Maybe I should be an advance man for a funeral parlor. I walked heavily back into Lippy's office. He must have been sitting comfortably staring out the window, admiring the desert, and someone had leaned over the desk with a small-caliber handgun and shot him in the back of the head. I reached over and picked up Lippy's phone and dialed the cops. A couple of highway patrol guys came roaring in about 30 seconds ahead of a couple of Riverside Sheriff's deputies and about 2 minutes ahead of a cruiser from Poodle Springs, which was outside its jurisdiction but showed up anyway. A dick named Fox took my statement. He was dark-haired and tight-skinned, and wore his sunglasses pushed up on his head. "Didn't I see your name on the wire last week?" Fox said. "Discovered a murder victim in Hollywood?" "It's a gift," I said. "At the peak of the season, I sometimes discover 2-3 corpses a day." "Maybe you do more than discover them," Fox said. "Sure. I blast them for no reason, then call the buttons and wait around for you to come and suspect me. I love being questioned by cops." Fox nodded, looking at the notes he'd taken on my statement. "Cops love it too. We got nothing better to do than talk cute with some second-rate gumshoe from the desert. I used to be a second-rate gumshoe from L.A. "Lucky for us," Fox said. "You say Lippy hired you to look for a guy owed him money?" I nodded. "Who was it?" I was quiet. "Marlowe. This is a murder case, and a guy who skipped owing Lippy money is a suspect, and withholding the name of a murder suspect is enough to get your license lifted and your keister in jail." He was right. I was out so far on the limb that I felt like a coconut. "Guy's name's Les Valentine, lives in the Springs." Two guys in coveralls came in with a body bag and a dolly. They worked Lippy's stiff body into the bag and wrestled it onto the dolly and went out the office door. Lippy bumped against the door frame on the way out. "We'd like to talk with you a little longer, Marlowe. We'll go over to the Springs. It's closer." "I've got my car." "Monson'll ride with you." We were in an interrogation room at the Poodle Springs Cop House. I was the special guest. Others included a female stenographer with hair the color of pink grapefruit, Sergeant Whitestone from the Springs, Fox, Lieutenant Wilton Crump, who was the Riverside County Chief Investigator, and as a surprise treat, Bernie Oles. Crump had piggy eyes separated by a wide, flat nose. The backs of his hands were hairy. "Let's understand each other, Marlowe," Crump said. He was chewing tobacco and holding a paper cup to spit into. "I know you're Harlan Potter's son-in-law, and it don't impress me a goddamn bit." "Oh, darn," I said. Crump reached around under his coat flap with his right hand and came out with a woven leather sap. He smiled, a big, mean, tobacco-stained smile. "I don't have much time, Marlowe, for funny. I don't have much time for cute. You found 2 stiffs in the same week, both shot with a small-caliber gun in the head. You got something you want to say about that?" "Just lucky, I guess." Crump slapped the blackjack against his thigh and bent toward me. His breath smelled like he might have eaten sensen. "Now, we're just dumb coppers," Crump said, still close to my face. "And so a smart, rich private eye like you probably knows stuff that we don't know, see?" "I'm not rich. My wife's rich." Crump talked on as if I hadn't spoken. "But we were wondering if there might not be some sort of connection, maybe between the 2 stiffs you found. Lieutenant Oles here was wondering that enough to drive all the way out here after we called him and said we'd been talking to you." Oles was leaning against the wall, with his hat tilted forward over his eyes. "Before Crump frightens us both to death, you might care to talk a little bit about how come you were chasing around Western and Sunset at 3:30 in the a.m. with the wife of the chief suspect in the murder of Lola Faithfull." I said to Bernie, "If you can get buzzard breath here out of my face, maybe we can talk." Still leaning in close, Crump hit me on the side of the left knee with a blackjack. The pain ran the length of my leg into my groin. The leg started to throb immediately. There was a hint of tobacco juice at the corner of Crump's mouth. He snarled at me. "Buzzard breath, smart boy?" "Put the sap away," Oles said in a soft and pleasant voice, "or I'll strain it through your teeth." Crump jerked a little as if someone had jabbed him. No one said anything for a moment. The two men stood close together. Then Crump said, "The hell with this," and turned and left the room. Oles smiled as if at some private joke. "You discovered 2 homicides in a week," Oles said. "In 32 years of police work, I've never seen a coincidence like that. Believing in coincidences is believing in dead ends. Cops hate dead ends, Marlowe." "I know," I said. "I worry about that. Some nights I can't sleep." "You find 2 stiffs in a week in the course of looking for a deadbeat named Les Valentine, who, it turns out, is Clayton Blackstone's son-in-law." "And Clayton Blackstone worries you?" "Yeah, I stay up nights too," Oles said. He walked over to put his cigar out in a half-empty paper cup of coffee. He turned back toward me. "You got no client, Marlowe. You got nobody to protect, unless you're protecting yourself." "There's nothing more I can tell you, Bernie." Oles sighed. "Okay, Marlowe." He turned to Sergeant Whitestone. "Use your jail?" "Sure," Whitestone said. "Book him. Stick him in a cell. Maybe a connection will occur to him." "What charge, Lieutenant?" "Your choice. You'll think of something." Then he put on his hat and walked out of the room. It was quiet in the Poodle Springs Hooskow. There were a couple of other prisoners, but it was late and they were asleep. The only noise was the sounds of sleeping men, an occasional snore, a mutter, once a brief sob. Outside, the late-night life of the Springs went on. People had midnight snacks and made love and slept with the refrigerator humming quietly in the kitchen. I wondered if Lippy would have been killed if I'd told the cops all I knew. Guys like Lippy were always walking on the railing, but dying's a long fall. Blackstone had no reason to kill Lippy, even if he found out that he was chasing Les for money. But Les had a reason, and he had a reason to kill Lola Faithfull, too. A blackmail reason having to do with a picture. Whoever killed Lola had also cleaned out Larry's files. I smiled to myself in the dark. When he was in Poodle Springs, I called him Les. When he was in L.A., I called him Larry. No wonder I was confused. Were they looking for the picture? Why would the killer take all the files? If Larry killed her, he'd know what was in the files. He wouldn't have to take them. But he might because he'd know the cops would find them. He might be embarrassed. The turnkey strolled down the corridor outside the row of cells. He paused and stared in for a moment before he moved on. Suppose Larry had agreed to pay Lola blackmail and she came and brought the picture and he killed her and took it. He'd destroy the picture. But would Lola show up with the only print? Would she be that stupid? Blackmailers don't give up their leverage that easy. I thought about a cigarette. I didn't have any. Or my pipe, or for that matter my shoelaces, or my tie, or my belt. I lay back down on the bunk. There was no sheet, but there was a mattress and a blanket. I'd been in jails that had neither. Ah, Marlowe, you glamorous adventurer. I did some deep breathing. And where was the picture? Lola would have kept a copy. It wasn't in her house. The simplest answer was Larry again, and the simplest answer on Lippy was Les. And Les was Larry. Somewhere before morning I dozed off finally and dreamed that I was in love with a huge nude photograph of Linda. And every time I reached it, Tweedledum and Tweedledee grabbed it away and ran off in perfect tandem. At 6 a.m. they brought me some warm coffee and a stale roll. My head ached, my knee throbbed steadily. I touched the spot where Crumpet hit me. It was puffy and sore. I'd had maybe 2 hours' sleep. At 10:30 a.m., a new turnkey stopped in front of my cell. "Okay, Marlowe," he said. "You're sprung." I got up stiffly and limped after him as we went into the lobby of the cop house. Linda was there, and a guy in a white suit and a loud shirt. The guy in the loud shirt said, "Mr. Marlowe, Harry Simpson. Sorry we took so long. I had to wait until court opened this morning to get a writ." He had a dark tan and loafers with a little gold chain across the tongue. His shirt was open halfway to the navel. He wore a pinky ring. A Poodle Springs lawyer. In a little while he'd be calling me baby. Linda stood behind him. Her eyes rested on me so heavily I could almost feel the weight of her look. I got my stuff back, signed a receipt, and we went out the front door. "Where's your car?" Linda said. "Out back." "I'll drive you home and send Tino back to get it. You look awful." But better than I felt. Linda opened the passenger side of the Cadillac. "Get in, darling," she said. "Anything I should tell your dad?" Simpson said. "Tell him thanks," Linda said. "I'll call him later." We drove home in silence. When we got home, Linda said, "I think you should shower and get some sleep. We can talk later." I did as she suggested, though I reversed the order. At 6 o'clock that evening, I was nearly human again. I was sitting by the pool in a silk robe with an ice pack on my swollen knee. Tino brought me a double vodka gimlet on the rocks and a single for Madame. I dipped into the gimlet and looked at Linda. She stared into her glass as if in the bottom was an answer she didn't quite have. "I've been in the jug before, Linda. It's an occupational hazard like boredom and sore feet." "I frankly fail to see how you can do your work and keep your self-respect," Linda said. "This is no kind of marriage, I understand. You're out all night half the time. I don't know where you are or what you're doing. I wake up in the morning and get a call saying you're in jail. My husband. Here, in the Springs, in jail?" "What will they say at lunch?" I said. "Damn it, don't be so poor, snob, high and mighty, Marlowe. These are my friends. I care about them. I want them to care about you. I don't want to know that they're laughing behind my back at my husband." "They'll do that anyway," I said. "Not because I'm a gumshoe. Not because I spent the night in jail. They'll laugh at me because I don't have any money. In this great republic, that's how the judgment is made, darling." "But I have enough money for both of us." "Which is why, as I keep trying to explain, I can't take it. Me, Marlowe, the Galahad of the gutter. I won't be bought or pushed, not even by love. You're a success if you have money, but you give up too much." It was a long speech for me. I washed it down with some gimlet. It didn't help. Gimlets were for holding hands across the table and saying nothing, and knowing everything. I put the drink on the table. Linda hadn't touched hers. She used it to stare into. "This isn't working," she said finally. "I'm not saying it's your fault, but it isn't working." She turned and walked back into the house. I picked up the double gimlet, flicked my wrist, and sluiced the contents onto the ground and leaned back on the chaise and listened to the ice melt in the bag on my knee. I spent the night in the guest room. In the morning I was out of the house early. The hard, disinterested sky was cloudless as I got out and walked up Muriel's Walk again. The houseboy answered my ring and went to fetch Mrs. Valentine. When she appeared, she seemed as bleak as the desert. Her eyes looked as if she'd cried and her mouth was thin. "He's been gone since the day after you left him here," she said. "You know Lipschultz is dead," I said. "Yes." "Did you know he worked for your father?" She stepped back as if I had poked a live snake at her. "Your father owns the Agony Club." She didn't say anything. She kept looking at me, her face tight. She felt worse than I did. I got in the Olds and sat for a moment, staring at nothing, then headed for L.A. I found Angel sitting on her front porch. She sat in the rocker with her knees up, her arms around them, her chin resting on them. "You waiting for him?" I said. "Yes, I didn't go to work." The sound of the surf, muffled as it rolled over the sand, was a white sound behind us. "He's not worth this, Angel. He's got no spine." "I love him," she said, and shrugged. I thought about Muriel, her face scraped bare of anything but hurt. I looked at Angel. This creep had 2 wives crazy about him. I was on my way to having none. If he killed Lippy, he might have killed Lola. Angel simply shook her head grimly and stared at the beach. There wasn't anything else to say. I tried a wry smile and turned and went away. When I glanced back, she was staring at the beach, motionless. I drove from Venice downtown to see Bernie Oles. The office was as blank as a waiter's stare. "You look like a man who had a lousy breakfast," Oles said. "Les Valentine and Larry Victor are the same guy." "Aren't they both married?" "Yeah." "You've known this for a while." "I've known it since before Lola Faithfull got killed." "You said something to us. Maybe Lipschultz wouldn't have gone down." "A guy gets buzzed that didn't have to? Say Lippy deserved it more than some. He didn't deserve it from this guy." "Nobody deserves it, Bernie." "Sure, Marlowe, let your heart bleed a little. And while you're at it, why don't you explain to me why you held out on us?" "He's a loser. He's a spineless creep. But he's got a nice little girl who loves everything about him." "Only one?" I shrugged. "I'll get to that. I still don't know if he did it, but he looks more likely every time you turn around." "You covered for some guy you barely know because he's got a nice wife?" "They looked happy, Bernie. You don't see too much of that." "Okay, Marlowe, tell me everything, from the beginning. Real slow, a lot of small words so as not to confuse me." He leaned back in his chair. "Go," he said. I told him pretty much everything. When I was finished, he said, "And you still think whatever the hell his name is didn't do it?" "I don't know, Bernie. I've told you what I know." "We could charge you," Oles said, "aiding and abetting the escape of a felon and being stupider than 3 sheep. "I got an overdue library book, too," I said. "Get out of here," Oles said. He waved his hand, dismissing me the way a man shoos away a gnat. I got up and went. Movement is sometimes an adequate substitution for action. So I drove out to West L.A. looking for Sandra Lee. The blonde receptionist with the long thighs told me that Sandra Lee was expected in the next half hour, and I sat on one of the silver couches, gazing into some ethereal beyond. I arched my back, and while I was arching it, in came Sandra Lee. She turned her head with that impersonal, friendly look that people get who are used to being recognized. "Marlowe," I said, "we had a talk at your home the other day about Les Valentine, among other things." I walked across to her, and as I went I took the naked picture of her from my inside pocket and unrolled it. "I thought you might be able to help me," I said. She looked at it, and her face showed nothing. "We can talk in here," she said. She led me into a small dressing room with a big mirror ringed with lights. There was a makeup table full of jars and powders and brushes. "So you're just another little nasty blackmailer," she said evenly. "I'm not so little," I said. "What do you want, Marlowe? Or are you one of those guys gets his rocks off talking to a woman while you look at her nude picture?" "That's one of my favorites," I said. "But this time I'm trying to get a handle on Larry Victor." "You're not trying to shake me down?" "I wouldn't dare." "What can you tell me about Larry?" "A full-fledged creepster," Sandra said. "Couldn't make a living except doing nudes for skin magazines. He wore a toupee and his hands sweat." "And if you got to be an important model," I said, "he'd try to blackmail you." "Or if you got into pictures," she said. "Not a bad racket. Sells the product once, and in some cases sells it again for more later." "Like a growth stock," Sandra said. "Only times changed. Pretty soon no one much cared if you showed your tush in public and Larry's business took a nosedive. Like livery stables, I said. And you wouldn't have a guess where he might be now? No. I'd have no idea. I was still holding her picture. I gave it to her. I was a piece of work in those days, she said. Still are, I said. She smiled at me. Thanks. I turned toward the door and gave her my killer grin and left. I went back up Westwood to the village, past UCLA to Sunset, and drove east. I barely knew Larry Victor, and I was getting very sick of him already. My marriage was in trouble. The cops were in a contest to see who had the best plan for locking me up the longest, and everything I learned about Larry Victor made me wonder why I was taking any trouble for him at all. Lola had been blackmailing Larry with a picture. So where was it? I had tossed her house like a Caesar salad and found nothing. I drove on through Hollywood and swung up to Lola's house. The lawn looked a little more unkempt. People die, hearts break, dynasties fall on their kisser, and the grass keeps growing a little at a time. I opened the door the same way I had the last time and went in again. Last time I'd been looking for a picture. This time I was looking for something else. A key. A receipt. Something to tell me where she hid the picture. It had to be there. And it was. After an hour I found it. In among the unpaid bills stuffed into a pigeonhole in the old desk was a receipt from the parcel room at Union Station. It took me half an hour to get to Union Station and find the checked luggage office and present my receipt. A black man of many years shuffled back into the catacombs of storage and emerged after maybe 3 weeks with a flat manila envelope. I opened the envelope. There was a negative and an 8x10 glossy picture of Muriel Blackstone Valentine wearing high-heeled leather boots and nothing else. She was smiling a seductive smile. I held the negative up and looked at it against the light. It matched. I headed out under the arches, past the cab stand toward where I'd parked my car. Time to go back to the Springs. Linda was pacing in the living room, past the glass wall with the butterflies. The nude picture of Muriel Blackstone was on the bar. I had no idea that Muffy Blackstone... She shook her head. Maybe most women lead lives of quiet desperation, too, I said. Maybe they do, but I must say I don't see why my husband has to be the one to dig that up. I mean, really, Philip. She nodded at the picture. Aren't you embarrassed? It's been a long time, I said, since I got embarrassed. Well, you should be. I am. I'm a detective, lady. You knew that when you married me. I guess I didn't think you'd always be a detective. Damn you, Marlowe, can't you see how it is for me? Can't you budge even a little bit? I can budge on where we live, or who we entertain, or where we go for our honeymoon, but you want me to budge on who I am, and I can't. This is what I am, a guy who ends up with dirty pictures in his possession. And 2 murders, Linda said. And some story about bigamy? And probably a lot worse to come, I said. It's the way I make my living. It's the way I got to be the guy you wanted to marry in the first place. Linda stepped to the bar and picked up the picture. Perhaps she had Les take it, just for them? Maybe. Darling, Linda said, let's go to Mexico again, today, right now. I could be packed in an hour. You could be packed in 2, and you'd pay for the trip, and when we got back, I'd still have to make a living. You have to live your life. I have to live mine. And we can't seem to do that together, Linda said. No, we can't seem to, I said. We were silent for a long time. I'll ask my attorney to draw up divorce papers, Linda said finally. We were silent again. Through the plate glass, 2 swallows darted into the bougainvillea and disappeared in the leaves. I'll stay in the guest room tonight, I said. Tomorrow I'll move back to L.A. She nodded. There were tears in her face. Damn it, Marlowe, she said. We love each other. I know. It's what makes it so hard. I found a furnished apartment on Ivar, north of the boulevard, in a stucco building built around a courtyard in the days when Hollywood had more screen stars and fewer hookers. My old office in the Cahuenga building was still empty, so I moved back in. The desk, the 2 file cabinets, the old calendar remained. The outer office was still empty. 2 dead flies lay on the floor just inside the door that still said Philip Marlowe, Investigation. I put a fresh bottle of bourbon in the bottom drawer and I rinsed out the 2 glasses on the sink in the corner, and I was ready for business. Except there wasn't any business. A cousin to the dead flies was buzzing lethargically against the window pane. I got up and carefully opened the window. The fly soared lazily out through the window and into the traffic fumes, and then he was gone. I closed the window and sat down. No one came in, no one called. No one cared if I got rabies or went to Paris. At noon I went out and got a ham sandwich at a joint on the boulevard and went back to my office to try sitting with my feet on the other corner. I heard the outer door open and shut. And then Eddie Garcia came into my office and glanced around once and stepped aside, and Clayton Blackstone came in behind him. He had on a double-breasted gray pinstripe that cost more than my car. "You've left the desert," he said. Word travels fast. Clayton smiled. "I'm sorry for your marital failure." "Sure." Blackstone reached inside a pigskin leather wallet. He took out 5 $100 bills and laid them on the desk. "You wish to employ me?" I said. Eddie laughed his harsh bark again. "See, Mr. Blackstone, I told you he was a smart guy." Blackstone nodded. "I want you to find my son-in-law. I wish you to bring these 2 murder investigations to a satisfactory conclusion. I wish my daughter's life to be orderly and pleasant again." "What if the orderly conclusion is that your son-in-law buttoned both of them?" I said. Blackstone shrugged. "Okay." I leaned over and picked up the hundreds and put them in my wallet. There was nothing in there to crowd them. "If you wish to reach me, call Eddie. He will put us in touch. He has my complete confidence." I looked at Eddie. "Mine too," I said. Eddie Garcia moved ahead of him and went out the door. Blackstone followed. Neither of them said goodbye. Except for the fact that there was money in my wallet, I didn't feel much different than not working. I still didn't have any idea what to do to earn my retainer and advance against expenses. I swiveled my chair around and stared out the window. The first idea I had was that it was time to change the grease in the friolator in the coffee shop downstairs. In the L.A. basin, hard-looking thunderheads were building. In a while the rain would come hard. I swiveled around and got out one of the pictures of Muriel and slid it in a manila envelope. I put one of my cards in with it and sealed and addressed the envelope. Then I went down to the post office and mailed it and went back to the office. To pass time, I bought myself the first drink from the new office bottle. I was finishing the next to last swallow when I heard my outer door open again. Maybe I'd have to hire an assistant. I put the bourbon down and got a confident smile on my face, and in walked Les Larry. "That was easy," I said. "Huh?" "Someone just hired me to find you." "Who?" I shook my head. Larry looked like he'd been sleeping in bus terminals and washing in the men's room. He saw me looking at him. "Been on the go," he said. "Haven't gotten a chance to clean up today." I nodded. The office bottle was still there. He was gazing at it the way a cow looks at a meadow. "Sun's over the yardarm somewhere, right?" he said. I got up and got the other glass and poured both of us a substantial drink. He grabbed his and guzzled nearly a third of it before he put the glass down on the edge of my desk. "Nice setup you got here," he said. "For rats, maybe," I said. "Is there anything you came to see me about?" I waited. I knew he was desperate. He leaned over and picked up my pack of cigarettes. "Mind?" I shook my head. He lit up, dragged in some smoke, took a swig of bourbon, swallowed, let the smoke trail out. "I didn't kill that bimbo," he said. "Hell, you believe me, you helped me get away." "That was mostly Angel," I said. "I'm a sucker for happy together." You're the only guy I can level with. Like you did when I dropped you off at Muriel's, that you'd stay there where I could find you. Yeah, I know I ran out on you, but I had to get away from there. You don't know what she's like. I was suffocating there, Marlowe. I reached in my drawer and brought out one of the 8x10 glossy prints of Muriel Valentine. Jesus, he said. Where'd you get that? The Tooth Fairy, I said. Left it instead of a quarter. He drank some more bourbon and took another cigarette from the pack without asking. That's how I met her. She was posing for dirty pictures? She liked it, he said. Kinky rich girl, come in and get photographed in the nude. She wanted them sold. She wanted to know some guy on the street would pick her picture up and see it. Man, I'm a damn artist, and all I got to do to make a living was take dirty pictures. Here was this broad, had all the dough I wanted. For me, sure, but for Angel. Kid deserves everything. And look what she's got, I said. If you took her picture, how come she doesn't know you're Larry Victor? I was using Valentine then. You know, like a stage name. I was trying to do serious photography under my own name. And like when I get the chance to marry her, well, then I opened up a new office under my real name. To keep Angel in the dark, I said. I didn't want any connection with Les Valentine for Angel. She never knew I was using the name. Your mother know who you are? I said. Marlowe, I didn't kill anybody, but if the cops get me, Angel will know. Muriel will know. And her old man will know, and he'll send a very tough guy named Eddie Garcia around to ask you about how come you've made a big mess out of your marriage to his daughter. I took one of the $100 bills that his father-in-law by bigamy had given me and handed it across the desk to Victor. There's a flop house on Wilcox, I said. The Star Walk Motel. Check in there. Get cleaned up and stay there. I'll do what I can. If you're not there when I want you, I tell everybody everything, and you're on your own. Victor took the bill and stared at it. What's your real name? I said. Victor or Valentine? Victor. Well, originally it was Schlenker, but I had it changed. To Larry Victor, I said. He nodded. Okay, Larry. Go down there and wait for me. Victor got up and put my cigarettes in his shirt pocket and folded the 100 over once in his pants pocket and without looking back went to the door, opened it, and left. I called Eddie Garcia and he agreed to meet me at the Bay City Pier. A wind was whipping the tips of the swells and tearing a little spray loose from them. Garcia was wearing a light trench coat against the wind, the collar turned up. So what'll it be, sailor? Tell me about Muriel Blackstone. Does Blackstone know she's kinky? I had on a trench coat, too. Every well-dressed toughie had one. I reached inside it and brought out one of my pictures of Muriel. I felt like a man selling French postcards. As he handed it back to me, a raindrop splattered on it. Around me on the pier, I could hear other drops like that, splattering sporadically. Garcia nodded. Yeah. Blackstone took her to doctors. Exhibitionism, they said, and a lot of other crap that don't mean anything to me. Didn't cure her, though, just talked a lot. So where'd you get the picture, sailor? The rain was steady now, stippling the slick surface of the waves. Lola Faithful had it stashed in Union Station. I found the receipt in her house. And she tried to blackmail Larry with it. Or maybe she went all the way to the source. Mr. Blackstone, Garcia said. Which probably means you. You use a small caliber gun, hot-loaded? He made a movement and a gun appeared. He turned and fired, and a seagull spun out of mid-swoop and plummeted into the ocean. The gun was laying in his open palm. It was a squat .44 Magnum with a 2-inch barrel. It would have made a hole the size of a baseball in Lola Faithful's head. Not bad, I said, with that short a barrel. I was you. I'd find Les Valentine, bring him back to Muffy, take Mr. Blackstone's dough, and move on. The heavy, warm rain was hammering down on us like a bad headache. Mr. Blackstone finally got her married, you understand?
The guy's a creep, okay, and Mr. Blackstone don't care. He's got her out in the Springs, off the street, safe. You screw that up and Mr. Blackstone gonna be sending me looking for you.
And we stared at each other for a time in the rain, out at the far end of the city pier, a very long way from Poodle Springs. It was supper time when I got back from terrifying Eddie Garcia. I made myself a stiff scotch and soda and sat down and called Linda. Her voice was as clear as moonlight. "Darling," she said, "are you sheltered and warm?" "I wanted you to have this phone number," I said, and gave it to her. "It's a furnished apartment on Ivar. No houseboy, no pool, no piano bar. I don't know if I can survive." "Are you lonely, darling?" "Lonely? Me?" As soon as word got out that I was back in town, there was a stampede of starlets up Western Avenue. We were both quiet for a moment. The wires between us hummed faintly with tension. "I miss you all the time. I hate to sleep alone, darling." "I miss you too," I said, "except when the starlets are here." "Why can't you bend a little? I love you and I want you with me. Why is that so bad?" "It isn't. It's good. But you want me to be different than I am, and if I change, I disappear." There was a long silence on the line, and then Linda said softly, "Damn you, Marlowe." She hung up softly. I got up and walked to the window and looked out. It was dark. There was nothing to see but my own reflection in the black glass, streaked with rain. A 42-year-old man drinking alone in a rented apartment in Hollywood. I turned away from the window and headed for the kitchen to refill my glass. It was still raining the next morning, the kind of steady rain that makes you think it'll never stop. I shook the water off my trench coat and hung it in the corner of my office. I had coffee in a paper cup and I sat down at my desk to sip it. I was wearing my .38 in a shoulder holster. If it kept raining, I might have to shoot my way on board an ark. My outer door opened and closed. There was a clack of heels, and then Muffy Blackstone came in out of the rain. She marched around in front of my desk and stared down at me. "Good weather for ducks," I said pleasantly. She kept staring. I nodded at the coffee on the corner of my desk. "Care for a sip?" I said. "I don't have another cup, but I brushed my teeth good this morning." She opened her big shoulder purse and took out the manila envelope I'd mailed her 2 days ago. She tossed it on my desk without a word. I looked at the picture and then turned my head sideways to compare her face with that in the picture. "Yep," I said finally, "that's you." "Where did you get it?" she said. Her face was very tight. Lola Faithful had it hidden in the baggage room at Union Station. "Why did you send it to me?" The lilt in her voice was the sing-song of hysteria. "I thought you liked having your picture passed around. How come you're throwing a wingding?" "You working for my father?" "He hired me to find Larry for you and bring him back." "Don't call him Larry," she said, her voice in her chest. "Sure," I said. "He doesn't want you to bring him back to me. He just wants you to find him so Eddie can kill him. He won't let anyone have me. He'll never let me go. He finds a way, always." "How come he let you marry Les?" "We ran away, and when we came back we were already married. It was too late." That wouldn't have bothered a guy like Blackstone. A little thing like marriage, and it sure wouldn't bother Eddie Garcia. "I knew you wouldn't believe me. No one will. He'll ruin this like he ruined everything, and you'll help him." Her hands came out of her pockets, and in her right hand was a gun. It was a cute gun, a gun for a lady to carry, probably a .25, maybe hot-loaded. She held the gun in both hands, straight out in front of her, her knees bent a little, feet comfortably apart, just like someone taught her. "He loves me," she said, "and I won't let you spoil—" Everything moved very slowly. The rain uncoiled with infinite leisure against the window behind me. "They've all been trying to spoil it," I said, "haven't they?" "Yes." "And you had to kill them?" "Yes." "Lola," I said. She nodded slowly. "Lippy." Again the nod. I reached forward slowly and picked up my coffee. "But not me," I said. "I'm trying to help. I know where Larry is." I dropped my coffee cup. The coffee sloshed out on my pants leg as the cup bounced on the floor. "Whoops," I said, and bent to pick it up and went out of the chair behind my desk, digging the .38 out from under my arm as I went. Above me there was a flat snap and then another, and 2 bullets buried in the wall behind my desk chair. I fired one shot straight up to the ceiling to let her know I had a gun. "I don't want to shoot you," I said, and edged around the corner of the desk, low. I heard her heels, then the door. I walked to the window and looked down at Hollywood Boulevard. In maybe a minute, I saw her come out into the wet street, walking fast with her head down and her hands in her raincoat pockets. I got some paper towels and cleaned up the spilled coffee and threw the paper cup away. I looked at the bullet holes in the wall and the one in the ceiling. Be good for my image. I got my trench coat back on and headed out to my car. I was in no hurry. I was pretty sure where she'd go. There wasn't any place else. Bel Air under the wet sky was all emerald and scarlet and gold, with the rain making the streets glisten. The guy at Clayton Blackstone's gate let me through, and I went up the winding driveway and pulled in under the big front entrance. Garcia came out, jerked his head, and I followed him to Blackstone's office. Neither one of us said a word. Blackstone was behind the big desk again, this time wearing a double-breasted blue blazer with some kind of crest on the breast pocket. Standing near the bar with a drink in her hand, where I had expected her to be, was Muriel. Her cute gun was not in sight. Eddie closed the door and stood with his back to it. I took the same chair near Blackstone's desk that I'd sat in before. "Raining," Blackstone said absently. "Even in Bel Air," I said. "Your daughter stopped by my office," I said, "just before she came here." "Oh?" He looked at Muriel. "What was the substance of your discussion?" he said. "That you were intent on destroying her marriage, and I was being employed to do the same." Blackstone stared at his daughter. "Muriel?" She didn't answer. She was holding her glass against her breast, as if trying to warm the drink. "She said she would kill me, as she had Lola and Lippy," I said, and then she pulled a .25 automatic with pearl handle grips and began plugging away. Blackstone gazed at me like a man lost in contemplation. "Lippy and Lola were shot with a .25, I said. Blackstone nodded slowly, but he wasn't looking at me. He was gazing across the room at his daughter. "There is nothing, Muffy, that I cannot buy or frighten. Nothing so broken that I cannot fix it." She didn't look at him. "Lola had a bad picture of me, the kind I used to pose for a long time ago. She said she'd show it to all the people at the Springs and tell people that Les took it and—" She shook her head without looking up. "And?" Blackstone said. Muriel didn't move. "And she arranged to meet Lola at Larry's office, and when she got the picture, she shot her," I said. "What about Lippy?" he said to Muriel. "I didn't even know you knew him." "He hired Mr. Marlowe to find Les, to harass him. He owed Mr. Lipschultz money." Blackstone looked at me once, hard. I shrugged. "Did you know that Mr. Lipschultz worked for me, Muffy?" "Not until Mr. Marlowe said." "Why didn't you come to me? I would have given you money." She stared at the floor. "I was ashamed. I didn't want you to know that Les was in debt from gambling, so I went out to talk with Mr. Lipschultz." "Did Lippy know your daughter?" I said. "No. He didn't know I had one. I kept business very separate from family." He turned back to his daughter. "What happened, Muffy?" "I asked him not to bother Les and me, and he said business was business, and his boss would nail his hide to the club door if he lost an IOU for that much. And I said I didn't have the money, but that there were other ways I could pay." "Jesus," Blackstone said softly. His daughter didn't speak. And so Lippy gets a smile like Brer Bear, I said. And he tells the shooters to hit the road and pours out a scotch and says, "How do you like the view of the desert, sweetie?" And I shot an imaginary gun, dropping my thumb on my extended forefinger. Blackstone stared silently across the room at his daughter. But when he spoke, it was to me. I had Eddie chase Larry Victor down, see what was cooking. He paused, looking at his cigar. "Muffy, the guy you killed 2 people for had another wife."
What do you mean? Another wife?
"He's married to another woman at the same time he's married to you, Muffy. He's a bigamist." Muriel straightened at the bar and half-turned, and put her drink down carefully on the bar.
"You sit there and make up lies," she said.
She spoke in gasps.
"You want to ruin my marriage. You won't let anyone have me. Never. You ruin it."
"Muffy!" There was more sharpness in his voice. She turned suddenly. Her hands came out of her pockets, the gun in her right. She dropped into her shooter's stance and put 2 bullets into Blackstone's forehead. I was half-turned in my seat when the side of her head spurted blood and the heavy thump of Garcia's big magnum sounded, and Muriel spun halfway round and fell face down on the floor. I checked both of them in the resonant silence that followed the gunfire, smelling the cordite in the room. They were both dead. Garcia was still holding his gun, standing by the door.
"Half a second," he said. "I was half a second late."
I nodded. Garcia said softly,
10 years ago I could have saved him."
"Cops will pour it on you, Eddie, if they make you for this," I said.
"They won't find me, Marlowe."
Still pretty fair shooting. She had the jump.
"Half a second," Garcia said again. "Half a second slow."
Then he opened the door and closed it and was gone. I went slowly to Blackstone's desk and picked up the phone and dialed a number I knew a lot better than I wanted to. The cops turned me loose in the middle of the afternoon. They didn't want to, but there was nothing to hold me for, except being a lousy detective. As I drove toward Venice, I tried to sort out how bad a detective I'd been. By the time I reached Santa Monica, I decided I couldn't sort it out and might as well think I'd been a good detective for all the difference it made. I parked behind the restaurant where Angel worked and went in and said, "Come with me." Her eyes widened, but she didn't ask questions. In 5 minutes, we were in my olds heading for Hollywood. "Have you found Larry?" "Yeah, I'm taking you to him."
"Is he all right?"
"Sure," I said, though I wasn't sure Larry Victor would ever be all right. The rain had tapered to a drizzle, just enough to engage the wipers. By the time we pulled up in front of the motel where Larry was stashed, the rain had stopped altogether. Angel and I went up the stairs to Victor's room. I knocked. The door opened about 3 inches, and Victor peeked out. I stepped aside, and he saw Angel.
"Larry.
Oh, my God, Larry." She was looking at him as if he were king of all the Persians. I said, "Muriel Blackstone is dead. So's her father. Being who he was, there's going to be a mess. How you handle it is your problem."
"How?"
Victor said. "Who?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "Wasn't you, and it wasn't me." I took the remaining 400s that Blackstone had given me and laid them on the cheap desk by the door. I turned and went out. Victor followed me. "What if the cops come?" "They will," I said, "if they can find you." "But what should I do?" "Stay away from me. And take care of that girl. If I ever hear you weren't good to her, I'll track you down and stomp on your face." I turned and went. Behind me, I heard Victor say, "For Christ's sake, Marlowe." I kept going. I heard Angel say, "Goodbye, Mr. Marlowe. Thank you." I waved without looking back. It was too late to go back to the office, and too early to go back to my furnished room and count walls. So I cruised slowly around Hollywood looking at the tourists and hookers, the people looking for stars, the prom queens from Minnesota, veterans already of the casting couches. They were all there on the boulevard, trying to get ahead, get a chance, looking for money, for love, trying to score some dope, some booze, something to eat. Most of them alone. Almost all of them lonely. I drove home. My apartment had the musty, closed-up smell that they get when nothing human is in them all day. I left the hall door open and threw up a couple of windows to let the air blow through. The clouds were colored with the sun as it began to set. I went to the kitchen to make a drink. I put ice and soda in a glass with a shot of scotch and carried it back to the living room. Linda was there. She had come in and closed the door. Beside her on the floor was a small overnight case. She wore a little pink suit and a silly pink hat and white gloves and shoes. "This is a community property state," I said. "Did you come to carry off half my ammunition?" "I came to make love with you." "I thought we were getting divorced," I said. "Yes," she said, "we are. But it doesn't cover making love." I felt as if I might disappear into her eyes if I looked at them too long. She unpinned the silly pink hat and put it on the coffee table. "I need to know what all this means to us," I said. "It means that we love each other too much to give each other up. We can end the marriage, but we cannot end the love. Probably we can't live together. But why must that mean we can't be lovers?" "Well, it makes sense to me," I said. Linda unbuttoned the suit jacket and took it off, and unzipped her skirt and slid out of it. She took off her undergarments and let them drop to the floor and stood up straight and smiled at me some more. "Do you wish to have me ravage you here on the living room floor, or would you prefer to retire to the bedroom?" I said. I seemed disconnected now from my voice, as if we were enacting a poem that someone else had chanted. "I think both," I heard Linda say. And later, much later in the darkness, with the world put far aside, I heard one of us say, "Forever?" And the other, I don't know which, our voices had merged by then, answered, "Forever." Copyright 1989, Dove Books on Tape, Incorporated.